Chapter 79. The morning dew had moistened the streets of G City, and a misty white mist was drifting and lingering in the streets and alleys. Riding on a single-horned deer, Wu Qi brought a group of attendants back to Duke Yan Li's mansion. Early in the morning, he brought Lu Qingfeng's authorization document and visited 7 government offices that were related to fiefs in G City. With great effort, he finally helped Yu Xian obtain the fief of a county that was offered as a reward by Chief General Jing Ku. The reward offered by Chief General was set in stone, and there was no loophole in it. A fief of a county was very attractive, but if it wasn't Yu Xian, who was an influential person, or if it was the previous Lu Qingfeng, it might not be a blessing for him to obtain this fief. Perhaps, on the second day after he obtained the fief, he would drown in a river for no apparent reason, just like his birth father. Even if it were the current Duke Yan Lu Qingfeng, if he were to obtain a huge fief for no apparent reason, he would definitely be envied by the other influential members of various sections. This was not a good thing for Lu Qingfeng's development in Great Yan Dynasty. Therefore, he decided to let Yu Xian, who held a high position and held a great power, bear this trouble. Besides, without this fief as a reward, it was still a question whether Lu Qingfeng could inherit the title of Duke Yanlu. But now, this fief was finally transferred to Yu Xian's hand using all kinds of excuses. The trouble was gone. Lu Qingfeng could sit firmly on the seat of Duke Yanlu, and he had also gained the friendship of all the imperial elders of Great Yan Dynasty, represented by Yu Xian. With that, Lu Qingfeng's foundation had become even more solid. The clatter of hooves was loud and clear. Wu Qi dismounted from his mount in front of the entrance of Duke Yan Li's mansion, and under the attentive greeting of a few gatekeepers, he walked up the stairs. He pulled off his cloak that was stained with dew and handed it to one of the guards. When Wu Qi was about to enter the mansion, a luxurious coach suddenly came out from an alley not far away. One of Princess Zhang Li's serving ladies poked her head out from the coach and called out to him with a clear voice, "Mr. Wu Qi." Wu Qi was taken aback, then hastily walked up to her and bowed gracefully to the serving lady. "Oh, Miss Baizhu. What can I do for you?" Of the 2 serving ladies of Princess Zhanglu, one of them was called Baizhu, who was standing in front of Wu Qi. She had a slender and intelligent appearance, and was a natural-born beauty. The other one was called Bai Miao. Her figure was plump and round, and she had a tender and naive personality. Moreover, she was slightly silly. Between both of them, the one who was usually in charge of handling all sorts of affairs for Princess Zhanglu was this clever and witty Baizhu. Baizhu covered her mouth and giggled, then lowered her voice and said, "I have something to do." She rolled her eyes and gave the surroundings a glance. After ordering a few palace guards who followed closely beside the coach to leave, Baizhu giggled and said, "When Princess woke up early this morning, she immediately asked someone to go to Garden of Zhanglu. She wants all the lakes and rivers in Garden of Zhanglu to be filled with water lotuses. Mr. Wu Qi, you've brought quite a lot of trouble to the stewards in Garden of Zhanglu. Hee, the lakes and rivers in Garden of Zhanglu are quite old." Wu Qi let out a hollow laugh. Yesterday, he was forced to do that to Princess Zhanglu, who was a little girl, and caused her to be in a daze. This was not the behavior of a real man. However, Princess Zhanglu actually remembered the water lotus Wu Qi gave her, and she wanted all the lakes and rivers in Garden of Zhanglu to be filled with water lotuses. This made Wu Qi a little dumbfounded and speechless. Baizhu winked at Wu Qi. She rummaged in her sleeve and took out an exquisite dark golden ring, handing it over to Wu Qi. It was a very exquisite ring. Its main body was dark golden in color, and 9 sesame-sized, dark blue gemstones were inlaid on its surface. Following the movement of Baizhu's fingers, a faint glow rippled from the ring, making it look magnificent, noble, and mysterious. Princess told me that Mr. Wu Qi is using a low-grade storage bag. It just so happens that Princess has an extra storage ring, and its quality is not bad. I hope Mr. doesn't mind it, and you can use it for now. The things inside the ring were given to Princess by His Majesty and His Majesty over the years. Princess doesn't need them, but Mr. can keep them for fun. Baizhu grabbed Wu Qi's hand and shoved the ring into Wu Qi's palm. Then, she continued, Princess has come to a critical moment in her cultivation. She has to enter into a meditative state every half a month. If it's a short period, she will come out from her meditation in 2 to 3 days, and if it's a long period, it might take 2 to 3 months. Even Princess herself has no idea how long she will need to enter into a meditative state. In short, when Princess comes out from her meditation, she will come and look for Mr. I hope Mr. doesn't miss her. Tilting her head, Bai Zhuo gazed at Wu Qi, who seemed to be in a daze. Then she slapped her own forehead, giggled and said, "I almost forgot." She reached her hand into another sleeve and fumbled for a while, then pulled out a palm-sized dark green medallion and shoved it into Wu Qi's palm. This is the token of 7 swallows, the highest authority in G City that Princess can obtain. With this token, Mr. can freely enter and exit the inner city at night and the Imperial Palace during the day. Apart from a few forbidden places and secret palaces, you can go anywhere you want. Taking a deep breath, Bai Zhuo continued, the authority of this token of 7 swallows is extremely great. Princess has only reported it to Mr., and you can never let it fall into the hands of anyone else. After giving Wu Qi a few hurried instructions, Bai Zhuo kept thinking about Princess Zhanglu, who had once again entered into a meditative state. Thus, she hastily urged her servants to send her back to the Imperial Palace. Wu Qi took out a storage ring and a token, and couldn't say a word for a long while. The token of swallow was a special token of Great Yan Dynasty. It was entirely dark green in color, the favorite color of the influential members of Great Yan Dynasty, and it was also the color of the court attire worn by all the ministers of Great Yan Dynasty. There were patterns of wind and clouds engraved on the token, and swallows could be seen flying amidst the wind and clouds. The lowest was 1 swallow, and the highest was 9 swallows. The token of 9 swallows was owned by only Emperor Yen Dan. According to the legends, the token of 8 swallows was only owned by Jing Ku, Gao Jianli, and a few other important ministers. The token owned by the 8 princes was only at the level of 7 swallows. With this token, one could basically do whatever he wanted in G City. However, the token that Princess Zhanglu applied for Wu Qi was at the level of 7 swallows. From this, it could be seen that Princess Zhanglu held a mighty power in G City, and it could also be seen that she had a strange relationship with Wu Qi. Twitching his lips, Wu Qi fiddled with the token for a while, then shoved it into the storage ring. He smiled bitterly and said, "How did I end up in a situation where I used a little goldfish to deceive a little girl? With just a few plagiarized words and a little bit of scheming, I've managed to seduce a descendant of a noble family. Am I too lucky? Or am I too unlucky?" Laughing bitterly, Wu Qi dripped a drop of blood onto the storage ring, then branded a thread of divine sense onto it. With that, he had successfully taken over the ownership of the ring. When he sent his divine sense into the ring, he was immediately startled by the huge space inside. The storage bag he stole from Old Devil and Lord Flame only had the storage space of 3 rooms, and the standard size of a room was only 15 feet in both width and length, and less than 10 feet in height. At this moment, the storage bag was fully filled with all the gold, silver, jewelry, and all kinds of energy stones and minerals he had found in Little Mang City. As for the storage ring given to him by Princess Zhanglu, it was about 1,000 feet in both width and length, and the height was about 1,000 feet as well. It was simply the storage space of a skyscraper. The huge space inside looked a little empty, and a few huge bronze chests were hovering in midair, emanating faint ripples of energy. Wu Qi scanned through the bronze chests with his divine sense, and couldn't help but twitch his lips. These chests measured 6 feet in both width and length, and were about 3 feet in height. The characters of Great Yan Dynasty's imperial treasury were engraved on their covers. From the nameplate underneath, Wu Qi could tell that these chests were the inventory of Great Yan Dynasty's strategic storage, but they were taken out by Princess Zhanglu as a favor. There was a total of 8 chests, and all of them were neatly polished, each the size of an adult's fist. All of them were upper-grade water elemental energy. All of them were dark blue in color, glinting brightly like the color of the deepest ocean, and contained an extremely powerful water elemental energy. The total amount of upper-grade water elemental energy stones in these 8 chests was at least 100,000. These were the strategic storage of Great Yan Dynasty's imperial treasury. Only God knew how Princess Zhongli took them out from the imperial treasury, and how did she erase the trace of these energy stones from the account book. Wu Qi felt his scalp go numb, and he couldn't help but admire the audacity of Princess Zhongli. Why do I have a feeling that I've become Xiaobai, that guy who lives off a woman all year round? Shaking his head in a self-mocking manner, Wu Qi used his divine sense to scan the several dozens of cold jade medicine bottles placed next to the 8 bronze chests. There was a mark on each of these medicine bottles, which was engraved with the words innate water pill. There was a total of 36 medicine bottles, and in each of them were 12 half-transparent, dark blue spirit pills, the size of a pigeon's egg. They were emanating powerful ripples of water elemental energy. Princess Zhongli's cultivation base was much stronger than Wu Qi's. After all, when she was born, she already had the cultivation of respiration tier of Xiantian realm. On top of that, she had been cultivating for over 10 years. Although she was always playing around with the help of countless spirit medicines and energy stones provided by Great Yan Dynasty, she had now steadily stepped into the embryonic breath realm of Xiantian realm. However, with the help of those spirit pills, she still maintained the beauty and vigor of a young girl, unlike those cultivators of embryonic breath tier who were over 100 years old. With Princess Zhongli's cultivation base, she could naturally tell that Wu Qi was cultivating with water elemental energy, and the innate water serpent pill he gave to Princess Zhongli was also the inner pill of a water elemental spirit beast. A teenage girl was always so ignorant and impulsive. Since she had a good impression of Wu Qi, she wished she could give all the good things under the heaven to Wu Qi. When Wu Qi gave her the innate water serpent pill, as a gift, she immediately gave him 8 chests of upper-grade water elemental energy stones and several hundred spirit pills that could enhance the cultivation of water elemental energy. Wu Qi sighed lightly and shook his head again. Upper-grade water elemental energy stones. After searching for so long in Little Meng City, Wu Qi had never seen an upper-grade energy stone with his own eyes. If not for the record in Scroll of Stealing, he wouldn't be able to recognize that these chests contained upper-grade water elemental energy stones. As for the innate water pill, with the insight Wu Qi inherited from Scroll of Stealing, he could tell that it was a lower-grade spirit pill of decent quality. Each pill could at least enhance the cultivation base of a cultivator of respiration tier of Xiantian realm after 1 year of arduous cultivation. 36 bottles of spirit pills were more than enough for Wu Qi to cultivate to the embryonic breath tier in the shortest time possible. Furthermore, his foundation would be extremely stable, and there would be no danger of his foundation being shaken. If she wasn't the most beloved princess of Great Yan Dynasty, if she were someone else, how could she easily take out so many things just to return the favor? The hardest thing to accept is the kindness of a beauty. Is she my luck in love, or is she my misfortune in love? Without saying a word, Wu Qi transferred all the things in the bag into his storage ring. He swore in his mind, "Fine, Princess Zhongli Zixian, no matter it is my luck in love or misfortune in love, I, Wu Qi, will take it all." Could it be that he, Wu Qi, didn't even have the courage to accept the kindness of a little beauty? Letting out a long laugh, Wu Qi casually threw the empty bag to Meng Xiaobai, who was standing in front of the door. "Xiaobai, this treasure is yours now." Chapter 80. Wu Qi leaned his back against the window, looking down at those young men who were having fun wantonly a few levels below. A faint sneer could be seen on his face. They were still young, and their seniors still had several dozens of years to hold the power. Therefore, they still had several dozens of years to waste. To them, being absurd once in a while was just a small matter that was pleasing to the eyes, and nothing serious. The rest of them were from wealthy clans as well. Although they were not the eldest son, their status was not low, and they were highly valued in their clans. They were the candidates for the main leadership of their clans. Wu Qi smiled, then spat a mouthful of phlegm towards Toba Haofeng, who was standing on the deck. Without a doubt, as the clan leader of the 9th clan of Great Yan Dynasty, Lu Chengfeng held the title of Duke and the official position of Zhuguizheng. Lu Chengfeng had the highest status and noblest status among all of them. Therefore, all the young men who surrounded him were from the most influential and wealthy clans in Great Yan Dynasty. Some of their seniors were serving as officials in the imperial court, and they were at least holding the position of prime minister or above. There were even a few young men whose seniors held the prestigious positions of the 9 ministers. Suddenly, a shrill scream was heard. A young girl, who could not be older than 14 years old, had her clothes ripped off by a few playboys. Laughing and laughing merrily, they lifted her up and threw her into the river. One of the playboys quickly stripped off his clothes, yelling and yelling as he leaped off the boat and hugged the girl who was laughing and shrieking. 2 meatworms were tangled up in the river. Amidst the girl's strange cry of pain, a stream of blood slowly drifted on the surface of the water. As if he had sensed Wu Qi's gaze, the purple-robed young man raised his head abruptly, staring fiercely at Wu Qi with a pair of eyes as sharp as blades. Therefore, Lu Chengfeng indulged in debauchery, drinking and visiting prostitutes with these young men, singing and having fun, disguising himself as a playboy. Apart from the occasional sharp glint that flashed in Lu Chengfeng's eyes, anyone could tell that he was a good-for-nothing from head to toe. Moreover, he was the kind of good-for-nothing who was extremely lucky and had accumulated a lot of good karma in his previous life. Great Yan dynasty had been established for over 2,000 years. Of course, there were elites like Yan Bugui, who could brave the frost and snow to carry out the military mission in the remote mountains, and he would be gone for 3 to 5 years. Naturally, there were also those good-for-nothings who, because of their good backgrounds, had their bright futures decided since they were young, so they were all good-for-nothings. There was a kind of restlessness in his soul that wanted Wu Qi to join these debauches and enjoy those young and beautiful bodies to his heart's content. However, the firmness and calmness that came from the depths of Wu Qi's soul shattered this restlessness. This was not what he was pursuing, and he was not willing to waste his time and energy on such a meaningless thing. It was as if a group of devils were dancing chaotically on the pleasure boat, and the atmosphere was foul. Wu Qi threw away the wine cup and kicked away 2 courtesans who were trying to leap at him. Obviously, they had consumed a large amount of immortal ascension powder as well. Wu Qi frowned. Lu Chengfeng had gradually gained a firm foothold in Ji City and had begun to expand his social network. It was time for Wu Qi to start making some plans. Therefore, on a small hill next to Myriad Red River, someone had occupied a large piece of land and built a large number of villas, countless restaurants and brothels. There were also nearly 1,000 pleasure boats of different sizes on the river, and it had become the largest entertainment venue in Ji City. Almost half of the young men on this boat were the eldest sons of various influential clans. If nothing went wrong, they would inherit the official positions and titles of nobility of their clans in Great Yan dynasty. In the future, they would be the high officials who could control the future of Great Yan dynasty. But at the moment, they were just a group of debauches from influential clans, spending their youth and energy in an unbridled manner on the pleasure boat. Taba Haofeng's challenge resounded throughout the entire pleasure boat. The noisy pleasure boat that was filled with a foul atmosphere a moment ago suddenly turned into a deathly silence. Great Yan dynasty had been established for over 2,000 years, but it had never developed the modern technology found on Earth. At most, the common people could only collect some natural coal and use it as fuel. There was no pollution in this world. Therefore, the river was extremely clear. The red leaves and the colorful petals merged together on the surface of the Myriad Red River, which was dark green in color and crystal clear. It was as if countless fresh flowers and red leaves were wrapped in a transparent crystal. It was an extremely gorgeous and charming scene. Although he had received a large amount of energy stones and spirit pills from Princess Zhanglu, Wu Qi still wanted to join an immortal sect. Lu Chengfeng needed a foundation, and so did Wu Qi. Among the itinerant cultivators, it was impossible for there to be a cultivator who was too strong, but among the immortal sects, the existence of geniuses was allowed. The white meatworms rolled and rolled on the deck of the pleasure boat, and the sound of their bodies hitting each other could be heard coming from far away. A couple dozens of hedonistic young masters were clapping and cheering excitedly, and some of them were even whistling shrilly like local ruffians. A large group of gorgeously dressed girls were mingling among these hedonistic young masters, trying their best to seduce them. The upper reaches of the Myriad Red River was a stretch of lofty mountains and lofty ridges. It was filled with trees that looked like maple trees, called gillen of red leaves. Throughout the year, palm-sized red leaves drifted into the river along with the wind, and were brought down by the rushing water. Half of the river was dyed red, and that was how it got its name. Both sides of the myriad Red River were farmlands and manors developed by the people of Great Yen Dynasty. The people of Great Yen Dynasty, who were born to be close to nature, had planted all kinds of flowers and trees along the banks of the river. Flowers bloomed and never withered in all 4 seasons, and countless colorful petals fell into the river, dyeing the entire river with 7 colors. When the countless petals and leaves of the myriad Red River flowed into it, the entire river was dyed with a myriad of colors. The purple-robed young man, who was smiling brightly just a moment ago, had his expression changed instantly, turning into a sinister and ferocious look. He pursed his lips, pointed his finger at Wu Qi and snapped, "Are you Wu Qi, the hanger-on of Duke Yenlu, Duke Qingfeng? You've killed my elder brother, and today, Tuoba Haofeng will fight you to the death." Clang! A sword cry rang out, as Tuoba Haofeng drew out his sword and forcefully threw it towards Wu Qi. "I need to find someone and ask around, and find out how many immortal sects Great Yen Dynasty has. Of course, I can forget about those sects that are purely official like Mo sect and Scouting Office, as I don't have the mood to risk my life for Great Yen Dynasty." Wu Qi murmured to himself in a low voice, calculating his plan in his mind. The fact that Lu Qingfeng was able to join a gathering like this, mingling with these young men, it meant that the clans behind these young men had begun to approach Lu Qingfeng, and had begun to cautiously approach Lu Qingfeng and build a relationship with him. Perhaps, these influential clans would not pledge their allegiance to Lu Qingfeng, but it was never a bad thing for them to build a relationship with a core member of the imperial clan. Wu Qi tilted his head, and the sword flew past his face, piercing deeply into a beam behind him. All of a sudden, those profligate sons who were fooling around on the deck below let out a loud cheer, greeting someone in a chaotic manner. Wu Qi breathed out a faint sigh, raised up the wine vessel, and slowly drank 2 mouthfuls of wine. The myriad Red River was a very wide river, and the Celestial Music Palace was at least 30 miles away from the riverbank. There were dozens of warships with strange designs that had sealed off the nearby waters, forbidding any other ships from approaching. Therefore, no matter how these profligate sons were indulging in debauchery, no one would know about it. In other words, it was the myriad Red River that nourished Ji City, nourished the people of Great Yen Dynasty. The fertile grassland and hills along the riverbank were the foundation of Great Yen Dynasty. Nearly 70% of the people of Great Yen Dynasty drank the water from the myriad Red River, ate the fishes found in the river, and ate all kinds of crops grown in the fertile farmlands of the myriad Red River. It was evening, and Lu Qingfeng was together with Wu Qi. On the largest pleasure boat in the myriad Red River, the Celestial Music Palace, they were mingling with a group of young nobles of Great Yen Dynasty. The sound of music and dance was pleasing to the ears, and the boat was filled with the joyful voices of the group of young men. From time to time, some drunken men would slip off the side of the boat and fall into the river, while some would clap their hands and laugh out loud, and some would hastily jump into the river to rescue them. The setting sun was hanging in the west, where the sky and the river met. Half of the river was dyed red by the sunset, while the other half of the river was colorful and gorgeous. Apart from Wu Qi, who was leaning against the window, no one else had the time to enjoy such a breathtaking scene. Some foppish men had already consumed the immortal ascension powder, which was made from some unknown raw material, and were stripping themselves naked, chasing after those singers and dancers, who were screaming and twisting their slender bodies while fleeing in all directions. A few coquettish singers accidentally stepped on the hem of their skirts and fell to the ground. The few foppish men quickly straightened their bodies and pressed on them impatiently. All of a sudden, a young man in his 30s, who was drinking and chatting merrily with Lu Qingfeng a moment ago, clapped his hands and laughed out loud. "Haha, Tuoba Haofeng is known as the #1 swordsman of the younger generation in Ji City. Mr. Wu Qi, do you have the courage to fight with me?" The pleasure boat of the Celestial Music Palace measured 500 feet from the front to the back, and was built with 3 layers of pavilions. Wu Qi and his company were sitting in the banquet hall on the highest layer. Lu Qingfeng had his arms around two young and beautiful singers, laughing and joking with a few young men from influential clans. Lu Qingfeng's birth father, Yan Buji, had lost his footing and fell into the myriad Red River one night, drowning to his death. He was a young man with a handsome face that almost looked like a demon. His skin was as white as a sheet of paper, and it was his biggest feature. Even his lips were as white as snow, devoid of any color of blood. He was clad in a purple robe, and there was no crown on his head. Instead, his hair was tied up with a red silk rope. He looked elegant and unrestrained, and his words and actions were calm and magnanimous. He was filled with the graceful and luxurious demeanor of someone from an influential clan. Wu Qi quickly poked his head out and gave the deck a glance. Compared to him, those foppish men who were indulging themselves crazily around him were like a group of mice in a sewer who met a noble lion. They were not on the same level at all. Just when a fast ship was nearing the railing of the pleasure boat, a young man clad in a purple robe was seen leaping up lightly and landing on the deck of the boat together with a few attendants. Those foppish men greeted this young man one after another, and in a calm and unruffled manner, the young man returned their greetings one by one. G-City was located at the intersection of the main stream of the myriad Red River and a main tributary, the myriad Red River. It was the same for Lu Qingfeng. If he could have a good relationship with these clans who held the real power, it would be much more convenient for him to do anything in the future. The myriad Red River was the largest river near G-City. Compared to the Yangtze River that Wu Qi knew, no matter it was the length, width, depth, or even the flow of water per second, the myriad Red River was at least 100 times larger than the Yangtze River. It was a huge river that ran across the entire territory of over 100 vassal kingdoms of Great Yan Dynasty from east to west, and its drainage basin covered nearly half of the entire Great Yan Dynasty. Chapter 81. Throwing away the long sword in his hand, Tuoba Haofeng steadied his body in midair, then casually pulled out a silver-colored talisman from his waist. While still in midair, Tuoba Haofeng let out a wild laugh and said, "Wu Qi, you're going to die today." Avoiding Lu Qingfeng's stern gaze, Haoying Fenglong clasped his hands behind his back and walked to the window, giving Tuoba Haofeng a smile. He gave Wu Qi a sidelong glance and said coldly, "Of course." In fact, Tuoba Haofeng has sent out a few hanger-ons to duel with Mr. Wu Qi. That's how their statuses are. A mouthful of blood sprayed onto the talisman, then Tuoba Haofeng pointed the talisman at Wu Qi. Tuoba Haofeng laughed arrogantly. He gave Wu Qi a disdainful look, his handsome face filled with pride and complacency, and said, "The chief supervisor of Central Wind Guard, Qin Qingshui, has made a decision on this matter today. Through the investigation of the crime scene and the testimonies of numerous witnesses, my elder brother, Tuoba Qingye, heard an unusual noise and went out to investigate. Out of kindness, he rescued Duke Yanlu and Duke Qingfeng, but he was mistakenly killed by you on the spot." Tuoba Haofeng immediately cried out sternly, "Wu Qi, don't drag our personal enmity into this. You've killed my elder brother, Tuoba Qingye, and I'll definitely avenge this. Qin Qingshui, I really want to see what kind of scheme you have in your mind." Lu Qingfeng's heart was filled with hatred. He turned around abruptly and gave Haoying Fenglong a fierce glare. It just so happened that Haoying Fenglong was looking at Lu Qingfeng as well. When he saw Lu Qingfeng's ferocious gaze, he suddenly squeezed out a smile and nodded at Lu Qingfeng. However, there was not even a hint of a smile in that smile, and it looked very fake. Dead silence. In particular, the singers and dancers of the Celestial Music Immortal Palace covered their mouths tightly. Lu Qingfeng's expression flickered. It was obvious that Tuoba Qingye had used prohibited weapons, and had even activated the city defense mechanism of G-City to assassinate him. Yet, in the end he, Tuoba Qingye, had become a good man who stood up for justice? Moreover, this good man was mistakenly killed by Wu Qi. Now, Tuoba Haofeng was in the right? Even flying flowers and leaves could hurt people. A mouthful of phlegm from a warrior of the Meridian cultivating tier was no weaker than a bullet from a large-caliber sniper rifle. Tuoba Haofeng's eyes turned red. He lost his composure and roared out, then exerted all his strength to hack 72 times at Wu Qi. On the other side, Wu Qi's heart skipped a beat, and he couldn't say anything for a long while. He could not believe that something that turned black and white upside down had happened just like that. With a sense of superiority that came from his innate talent, Tuoba Haofeng turned to the group of hedonistic sons and said, "All of you are the best friends of Tuoba Haofeng, and I want you to be the judge of this matter." When Haofeng's elder brother heard the unusual commotion, he brought many guards and went out to rescue Duke Yenlu, who was attacked. But in the end, he was brutally killed by Wu Qi and his men. "Don't you think that my elder brother was wronged? Should I seek revenge from Wu Qi?" Those hedonistic sons were looking at each other, and apart from a few who had consumed too much immortal ascension powder, none of them said a word. Although they were hedonistic sons, they were not stupid. Participating in the battle between the Xian kingdom and a duke was something that only a stupid pig would do. It was true that Lu Qingfeng was the clan leader of a branch clan of Great Yan Dynasty, but the monarch of Xian kingdom, Tuoba clan, also had the title of duke. On top of that, he had established his own kingdom, and his actual power was much stronger than Lu Qingfeng, a duke. Wu Qi turned his head and gave those hedonistic sons on the deck a look of excitement. He sneered and said, "You know I've killed Tuoba Qingye, but why did I kill him? Do you know the ins and outs of the matter? He used a military crossbow, trying to assassinate my young master." Unhurriedly, Wu Qi stood where he was, using his sword to block Tuoba Haofeng's sword with ease. Tuoba Haofeng's sword technique was ingenious, but his cultivation base was merely at the peak of Hotian realm. Thus, he posed no threat to Wu Qi. In Great Yan Dynasty, the Minister of Justice was in charge of all the laws and punishments, and it held a great power. Haoying clan was a wealthy clan that rose in the recent 700 years, not the clan that founded Great Yan Dynasty. The founding clans of Great Yan Dynasty, such as Jing clan, Gao clan, and Qin clan, and the Haoying clan, Qinshan clan, Gao Xian clan, and many others that rose after the founding of Great Yan Dynasty, had always had a clear distinction in the imperial court of Great Yan Dynasty. In the banquet hall behind Wu Qi, Haoying Fenglong, one of the 9 ministers of Great Yan Dynasty, the Minister of Justice, Haoying clan, suddenly laughed. "Duke Yenlu, you're wrong. Although the Xian kingdom is one of the vassal states of Great Yan Dynasty, and the monarch of Xian kingdom is also a duke in Great Yan Dynasty. Although Tuoba Haofeng is just a son of a concubine, and he wants to fight with the hanger-on of Duke Yenlu, it is because of Mr. Wu Qi's status." Laughing wildly, Tuoba Haofeng suddenly leaped towards Wu Qi like a wild tiger that had gone mad. His right arm spun like a windmill, slashing 13 times towards Wu Qi's head. The sword beams moved like lightning, bringing with them an immense coldness as they circled around Wu Qi's body. His sword technique was broad and simple and heavy. When the sword strikes were unleashed, it felt like a great mountain was pressing down from above, trying to crush Wu Qi into pieces. Wu Qi lowered his head and looked at all the people on the deck. He sneered disdainfully. The wind brought by the sword was whistling, and the sword beams were as dense as raindrops. However, with his mind in a chaotic state, how could Tuoba Haofeng possibly hurt Wu Qi? Wu Qi dodged his attack effortlessly, then sprung his right leg and kicked right onto Tuoba Haofeng's lower abdomen, sending him flying 70 to 80 feet away. Great skill, great cultivation base. Tuoba Haofeng took a deep breath, raised his head and looked at Wu Qi, sneered and said, "Can you fight a duel to the death with me?" All the information about Great Yan Dynasty that he had sorted out during the past few days flashed across Wu Qi's mind. He laughed self-mockingly and said, "What young Master Feng Long is trying to say is that Tuoba Haofeng has given me a great honor by challenging me to a duel?" Tuoba Haofeng's sword technique changed. From the heavy and simple sword technique, it changed into a soft and gentle sword technique that was as dense as the spring breeze and drizzle. He lowered his voice and roared with a twisted face. "The day before yesterday, Princess Zhonglu went to Duke Yenli's mansion, and when she came back, she ordered someone to give me a scolding. Today, I went to the imperial palace to seek an audience with Princess, and she granted me the permission. But today, I was chased out by Zhu with a stick in her hand. If this is not because of you, then what is the reason?" With a bright and innocent smile on his face, Wu Qi looked like an innocent and adorable child who knew nothing about the world. However, his tone was extremely evil and ghastly. The chastity of Princess Zhonglu will be mine. In a few days, I'll pluck this fresh flower and enjoy it to my heart's content. It is said that a girl will never forget her first man for the rest of her life. Both men fought fiercely for over a dozen rounds. The raging sword energies forced those hedonistic sons and those ladies who were watching the fight to stay far away from the bow of the ship. There was no one left within a circumference of 100 feet. Using the momentum of the sword, Tuoba Haofeng thrust himself into the circle of swords formed by Wu Qi. Suddenly, he laughed and asked in a low voice, "Wu Qi, do you really think I'm here to avenge that idiot, Tuoba Qingye? Do you really think I'm that stupid?" Then he waved both arms and unleashed an invisible energy that pushed those hedonistic sons, singers and dancers far away. Standing before Tuoba Haofeng, Wu Qi stretched out his hand toward Tuoba Haofeng and gently crooked his finger at him. "Tuoba Haofeng, come, I'd like to see what your Xian kingdom is trying to do." Viciously, he thrust his sword at Wu Qi for over 30 times, each strike never leaving Wu Qi's chest and neck. "You've killed Tuoba Qingye," Tuoba Haofeng cried out fiercely in a low voice. "I don't have enough time to thank you for that. But you've made Princess Zhonglu keep her distance from me. This hatred can't be washed away even with all the water in the myriad Red River. Wu Qi, do you know that if not for you, sooner or later, I would have made Princess Zhonglu my woman?" The silver talisman measured 2 feet and 4 inches long and 6 inches wide. On its surface, there was only a simple image of a sword piercing into the sky. When the talisman was unleashed, the surrounding air became extremely sharp. The breeze from the river blew across Wu Qi's body, causing him to feel a slight pain on his skin and flesh. All the hedonistic sons on the deck could only see a white beam flashing by. Suddenly, Tuoba Haofeng, who had been acting calmly and magnanimously, took a quick step back, wielded the sword in his hand and slashed into the air. A loud clang rang out. Tuoba Haofeng was forced to take 3 steps back, and a hole the size of a bowl was created on the deck. The monarch of Xian Kingdom, Tuoba clan, was also a feudal lord who was conferred the title of Great Yan Dynasty. Naturally, Haoying clan had a close relationship with Tuoba clan. Slowly, Tuoba Haofeng raised the water-patterned turtle scale sword in his hand, which had been thoroughly tempered. On the blade of the sword, which was as clear as water and had a faint snowflake pattern, there was now a thumb-sized chip. However, this precious sword, which was strong enough to break a stone pillar, was turned into a scrap by Wu Qi with just a mouthful of phlegm. The Celestial Music Palace was constructed with an extremely sturdy 1,000-years-old black teak wood, and its deck was half a foot thick. Not even an ordinary arrow could penetrate through it. Yet, Wu Qi's phlegm had actually created a hole the size of a bowl on the deck. This was not something that an ordinary man could do. If not for the fact that Wu Qi's innate water energy was extremely condensed, and its quality was comparable to a cultivator of breath condensation tear, how could his phlegm cause such a destructive force? Tuoba Haofeng cried out with a stern voice, "Wu Qi, the hatred of killing my brother is absolutely irreconcilable. This is a sword talisman that I begged from heaven-breaking sword sect with all my belongings. Now die." After a brief moment of silence, Wu Qi suddenly let out a long laugh. He pulled out his sword and pointed it at Tuoba Haofeng from a distance away. "Cut the crap. Let's fight to the death with our swords." Wu Qi laughed mockingly. He cast a sideways glance at Tuoba Haofeng, and with a backhand swing of his sword, he forced Tuoba Haofeng to take a few steps back. At the same time, he said in a strange tone, So that's what you're thinking? If that's the case, I'll have to become the guest of Princess Zhonglu before I meet you." Right after the silver beam appeared, the huge prow of the Celestial Music Palace was instantly shredded into pieces by the endless sword intent. A blinding light enveloped the heaven and earth. From the talisman, a silver beam, as thick as a water bucket, shot whistling out like a long rainbow, piercing straight towards Wu Qi's chest. Wu Qi hastily took 2 steps back, dodging Tuoba Haofeng's sword attack. Then, he casually launched another 2 sword attacks and said with a cold smile, "Why did you do that?" Tuoba Haofeng threw away the sword in his hand, which was smashed into pieces by Wu Qi's thick phlegm. Then he took over a spare longsword from one of his guards. He flicked the edge of the sword with his finger and said in a long voice, "O sword, today, you're going to drink the blood from your enemy's neck. Elder brother, come here quickly. Watch me kill my enemy and avenge you. Poor you. You've tried your best to save me from danger, but you were killed by an ungrateful man like this. Haofeng hates. With a gloomy face, Lu Chengfeng came next to Wu Qi with his hands clasped behind his back. He lowered his head and looked down at Tuoba Haofeng, who was standing on the prow of the prow. "Who do you think you are? How dare you challenge my man? Tuoba Haofeng, remember your identity. You're just a prince born from a concubine of Xian Kingdom." Wu Qi laughed out loud and smashed the windowsill with his palm. He strode out from the windowsill and slowly landed on the prow of the pleasure boat. He looked up at the sky and sneered, "So that's how it is. Tuoba Haofeng, you want to kill me? You're giving Wu Qi a great deal of face. Good. Wu Qi is not someone who doesn't know what's good for him. My head is right here. Let's see if you have the sharp blade to chop it off." Chapter 82. A sword talisman was a unique technique of a human immortal of Jin Dan realm. It was a sword talisman made from rare natural materials and sealed a sword energy of a human immortal of Jin Dan realm in it. Depending on the material and craftsmanship of the talisman, the power unleashed by a sword talisman was equal to 10 to 50% of a sword energy attack of a human immortal. Only a sword talisman made from a very high-grade talisman could unleash more than 50% of its power. The sword talisman in Tuoba Haofeng's hand was made from the spirit juice extracted from a 1,000-year-old green shell leaf and mixed with the skin of a 100-year-old golden toad. The quality of the material was not high, and the craftsmanship was ordinary. The body of the talisman was only of the lower grade. The power of the sword energy contained in the sword talisman was about 90% of a strike from a human immortal of Jin Dan realm, less than 10%. However, 90% of a full force strike from a human immortal of Jin Dan realm was equal to the full force strike from 10 embryonic breath realm Taoists of Xiantian realm. The bow of the Tianlu immortal palace, several tens of feet in circumference, was shattered into pieces. The sword energy blasted out a huge pit with a diameter of over 100 feet, reaching all the way to the bottom of the river. The sword energy spread in all directions. Countless hazy silver beams rolled and twisted in the river, killing countless fish nearby. Wu Qi's body was hovering in the middle of the surging silver sword energy. Both of his hands were placed on top of his head, and a blue light screen was flickering in his palms, blocking the attack of the sword energy. 4 upper-grade water elemental energy stones were hovering near his dantian, and an enormous amount of water elemental energy kept rushing into his body. Through his meridians, which were more than 10 times tougher than ordinary Taoists of Xiantian realm, they were quickly transformed into innate water energy, forming a layer of protective energy outside his body. The pressure on top of his head was like a mountain, and his whole body was being sliced by the sword energy. His skin could not withstand the attack of the sharp sword intent, and had already been torn apart, with large amounts of blood spraying out from under his skin. Wu Qi would have long been torn into pieces by the sword aura if it were not for the fact that his innate water aura was sufficiently condensed, and that he was good at using softness to overcome hardness with softness, as well as using the vortex to wear down the sword aura shot out from the sword talisman. Fortunately, Princess Zhongli had given Wu Qi 8 boxes of upper-grade water element energy stones, and fortunately, there was a special technique in Scroll of Stealing that could extract all the energy from the energy stones in an instant. If not, Wu Qi would have been smashed into a pulp by the sword talisman. Inch by inch, his body was pushed down to the bottom of the river by the sword energies. Wu Qi raised his head up, and through the blinding blue and silver light, he stared straight at Tuoba Haofeng, who had a hideous smile on his face and a pleased expression on his face. Wu Qi remembered his smiling face and the dangerous situation he was in today. If not for his good luck, Tuoba Haofeng would have gotten what he wanted and killed him under the sword talisman. Sword talisman. Tuoba Haofeng had come prepared. He had prepared a sword talisman in advance. Letting out a long cry, 4 water element energy stones in front of Wu Qi's dantian burst out with a blinding light at the same time, then turned into colorless powder and dissipated in the air. The surrounding water suddenly began to surge, and a huge amount of water vapor rolled and rolled, turning into a white mist and rushing into Wu Qi's body. A watery cloud suddenly condensed under his feet. Wu Qi forcefully exercised the special technique found in Chapter of Water in Scroll of Stealing, and his body began to emit a bone-piercing cold air. A stream of cold water vapor began to condense in Wu Qi's lungs, and a strange goo-goo sound was coming out from his mouth, while a misty white light was faintly visible on the corner of his mouth. The water element energy contained in the energy stones and the water vapor that rushed into his body were compressed by Wu Qi using a secret technique and formed into a cold and sharp sword energy in his body. Fearing that the sword energy was not powerful enough, Wu Qi clenched his teeth and pulled out the lower-tier flying sword from his storage ring, which he obtained from killing Aer in Little Meng City. He swallowed the short sword. His powerful divine sense quickly rushed into the flying sword, carving a faint spiritual mark on its body. After that, Wu Qi's body shrunk inwardly. Using his body as a furnace, he forcefully compressed the sword energy and the flying sword into one. Tuoba Haofeng thought that Wu Qi was going to die for sure. After all, this was a sword talisman personally crafted by a Jin Dan realm human immortal, and it was a treasure that he had spent a fortune and 4 beautiful girls to obtain. How could Wu Qi, a mere meridian cultivating tier cultivator, escape from the sword talisman? Tuoba Haofeng threw his head back and breathed out a long sigh. Hot tears rolled down from the corner of his eyes. He let out a loud and wild cry and said, "Elder brother, your soul is not far away. Tuoba Haofeng will avenge you. Today, the blood feud has been avenged. Elder brother can die in peace now." The sword talisman shattered into pieces, and all the sword energy left in it had been completely drained. Tuoba Haofeng's body had lost the recoil force from the sword energy. As a warrior of peak Hotian realm, he didn't have the ability to float in the air. Thus, he made a slight turn and slowly landed on the deck. The river water, which was blasted by the sword energy, was rolling and rolling toward the center. The rumbling of the water waves was so loud that it could make one's eardrums hurt. A large amount of water vapor rolled and rose hundreds of feet up into the sky. Amidst the white water vapor, Wu Qi was seen flying up into the sky with a miserable laugh. While letting out a strange laugh, Wu Qi suddenly opened his mouth and shot out a 3-feet-long white beam, shooting toward Tuoba Haofeng's heart along with a cold breeze. The white beam was extremely cold. Wherever it passed through, all the water vapor and water droplets were frozen into ice, and ice bullets fell down from the sky. Right after Tuoba Haofeng landed on the deck, he was about to greet those stupefied foppish young masters with a reserved smile on his face, announcing the victory of the duel to them. But all of a sudden, he saw a boundless shock and fear in the eyes of those foppish young masters and singing girls. His reaction was also extremely fast. He hurriedly let out a strange cry and his body suddenly leaned to the left. The white beam flashed and pierced into Tuoba Haofeng's heart from the back, coming out from his chest less than 2 inches away from his heart. A large amount of blood-red ice beads sprayed out from Tuoba Haofeng's chest. It was the blood brought out by the sword beam, but it was frozen into ice cubes by the frightening cold breeze that came from the sword beam. Tuoba Haofeng let out a miserable howl. He opened his mouth and sprayed out a stream of blood, but when the blood left his mouth, it immediately froze into a pillar of ice. He opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but a circle of white frost quickly spread from his chest to his entire body. In just a blink of an eye, he had been turned into an ice statue. The personal guards who accompanied Tuoba Haofeng let out a cry of terror. A few of them hastily rushed toward the frozen Tuoba Haofeng, while the others pulled out their swords and charged toward Wu Qi. Wu Qi's entire body was covered with blood. Although he managed to block the attack from the sword talisman by activating the energy stones, it was, after all, a sword talisman crafted by a human immortal expert of Jin Dan realm. Therefore, the supreme sword intent still managed to penetrate through his protective energy and hurt his body. At the moment, there were at least 40 to 50 wounds all over his body that looked like the mouth of a child, and blood was gushing out from them. Not to mention the external injuries, the sudden activation of the energy contained in 4 upper-grade water elemental energy stones was too much for Wu Qi's meridians, which had been tempered and strengthened dozens of times. His meridians had already suffered from internal injuries, and the width of his meridians had been forcibly expanded by about 10 times. His once flexible and thick meridians were now as thin as a piece of paper, and were densely covered with countless cracks. All of his innate energy had been expelled along with the sword beam. Only a tiny bit of innate energy was still circulating within Wu Qi's body, and it took him a great deal of effort to stand firmly on the bow of the ship and prevent himself from falling down. Right at this moment, a few personal guards of Tuoba Haofeng had drawn out their swords while roaring furiously, thrusting the tips of their swords towards the vital parts of his body. In just a blink of an eye, the swords had almost pierced into his body. Lu Chengfeng, who was standing on the highest floor of the banquet hall and watching the battle from the window, bellowed furiously, "How dare you? Wu Qi has won the duel. Who dares to hurt my people? Luo Kadi Maoyang, kill them all." 2 Xiantian warriors, Luo Kadi and Mao Yang, who were hiding among the crowd, let out a loud cry and dashed out. They were even faster than those personal guards who had drawn out their swords, and with just a leap, they arrived in front of Wu Qi, who had lost all of his strength. 2 long swords flashed across, and all 5 personal guards of Tuoba Haofeng could only see a sword beam flashing in front of their eyes. Before they could even see the movement of these 2 men, their throats and chests were pierced by the swords, and they fell to the ground with blood spraying out from their mouths. Zhang Hu and Hu Wei, together with a few personal guards from Meng village, squeezed out from the crowd, took out their 9 cloud-piercing crossbows, and aimed them at the frozen Tuoba Haofeng and his personal guards. Zhang Hu gnashed his teeth and howled, "Fuck you! We brothers have won the duel, and you still want to bully us with your numbers? Damn it, brothers, come out. Let's see who has more people." Footsteps were heard coming from all directions, and from a few important spots on the pleasure boat of Tianlu Immortal Palace, figures of the hanger-ons and personal guards of Lu Chengfeng appeared. All of them were holding 9 cloud-piercing crossbows in their hands, staring at all the people on the pleasure boat with ferocious gazes. Standing next to Lu Chengfeng's hanger-ons and personal guards were a great number of scouting office men. They looked at these foppish young masters helplessly, then gestured at them, telling them to back off. Yan Buji had drowned in the myriad Red River, and today, Lu Chengfeng had come to the myriad Red River to enjoy himself. Therefore, how could he not have enough personal guards? 80% of the servants and serving ladies on the pleasure boat of Tianlu Immortal Palace were either the personal guards of Lu Chengfeng or the secret agents of Scouting Office. When they heard Zhang Hu's roar, they immediately showed up and took control of the situation. At least 309 cloud-piercing crossbows densely covered the entire pleasure boat, emanating a strong killing intent that spread in all directions. Among those foppish young masters on the scene, even those who were the boldest, the most arrogant, and the most despotic had their mouths tightly shut. Chuckling, Lu Chengfeng asked Wu Qi from afar, "Are you all right?" Wu Qi took a deep breath, fished out an innate water pill and swallowed it, slowly releasing a strong medicinal strength to nourish his entire body. Coughing out a mouthful of blood, Wu Qi let out a strange laugh and said, "I feel uncomfortable when I see that pretty boy standing next to you, so I'm not feeling well." Lu Chengfeng let out a loud laugh. Abruptly, he spun around like a whirlwind and gave the stunned Haoying Fenglong 18 slaps in a row. The slaps turned his handsome pretty boy's face green, red, purple, and green, as if someone had opened a dye house, and his face was swollen like a steamed bun. Kicking Haoying Fenglong away, Lu Chengfeng clapped his hands and said with a smile, "I've beaten you up today. If you don't like it, you can ask your Minister of Justice to come and talk to me. Damn it, how dare you provoke me and the people around me with words? Are you tired of living?" Seeing a Duke of Great Yan Dynasty cursing and beating a son of a noble clan in such a rude and vulgar manner, all the foppish young masters were struck dumb. However, Wu Qi let out a loud laugh and said, Well done. Now I feel better. Hee hee, howling Fenglong, if you have any resentment, you can ask your Minister of Justice to come and talk to your grandpa Wu Qi. Wu Qi and Lu Chengfeng looked at each other and laughed out loud. Both of them glanced around, and all the foppish young masters on the boat bowed their heads. For a moment, they had a feeling that no one dared to go against them. Suddenly, a cold voice was heard coming from the river far away. The one laughing in front, "Are you Wu Qi from Duke Yen Li's mansion? I'm the current sect leader of Heaven-Breaking Sword Sect, Nye Baihong. I'm here to take you as my disciple." The laughter of Wu Qi and Lu Chengfeng came to an abrupt stop. Chapter 83. After the duel, the sun had long disappeared into the horizon, and a bright moon rose slowly from the east, where the sky and the water met. Half of the myriad red river was green and the other half red. Against the wavering shadow of the moon in the water, a lonely thought emerged out of thin air. A middle-aged man, no taller than 7 feet, clad in an ordinary burlap white robe, was walking slowly from the lower reaches of the river towards them with his hands clasped behind his back. He walked on the myriad red river as if he was walking on flat ground. Wherever his bare feet passed, a 3-inch deep footprint would be left on the surface of the river. No matter how the river rolled and flowed, these footprints were clearly imprinted on the surface of the river, and did not dissipate even after a long time. Looking at the footprints on the surface of the river, Wu Qi had goosebumps all over his body. This was the unique sign of a cultivator of Jin Dan realm. When a cultivator formed the Jin Dan realm, he or she would step into the realm of human immortals, with 1 foot detached from the 5 elements and the realm of mortals. They stood on the dividing line between human immortals and human immortals. Half of them were human immortals, and the other half were immortals. In a human immortal of Jin Dan realm, the conflict between the great Tao of heaven and earth was very obvious, and the external signs were all kinds of unusual signs. Some immortals carried a strange fragrance, while some immortals were surrounded by colorful clouds. Wherever this white-robed man passed, his footprints would be left on the surface of the river, which was also a kind of unusual sign. This was a sign that could be seen with naked eyes, and Wu Qi's divine sense told him that this white-robed man, who was walking slowly from a few miles away, was emanating a sword intent that was as sharp as a cold wind in the winter, and as sharp as a well-tempered blade. Wherever he passed, the sword intent seemed to split the void. This was the unusual sign on the spiritual level of a human immortal of Jin Dan realm. Without sufficient cultivation base and soul force, no one could sense the sword intent emanating from his body. Step by step, Nye Baihong, the current sect leader of Heaven-Breaking Swordsmanship Sect, came to the deck of Heaven Music Immortal Palace. When his bare feet touched the deck, the footprints that stretched for several miles on the surface of the river behind him disappeared one after another. When the footprints spread out, the fishes, shrimps, turtles, red leaves, and petals in the river nearby were all crushed to pieces by the invisible sword energy. More than 30 young masters from influential clans rushed out from the crowd and came before Nye Baihong in a disorderly manner. One after another, they dropped to their knees and kowtowed to Nye Baihong. Some of these young masters addressed Nye Baihong as sect master, some addressed him as grand master, and some even addressed him as supreme ancestor. The seniority of all these people was extremely diverse, and it caused Wu Qi to roll his eyes. Taking advantage of this chaotic situation, a few guards of Taba Haofeng hastily carried their master, who had been frozen into a block of ice, and stealthily sneaked off the pleasure boat. After that, they boarded the speedboat and quickly left the place. As Wu Qi was about to give the order to kill Taba Haofeng and his men, Nye Baihong suddenly gave him a look. A chill ran through Wu Qi's body, as if both his flesh and soul were slashed by a heavy sword. A buzzing sound kept ringing in his head, and he didn't come back to his senses for a long time. With just an indifferent glance, Wu Qi could tell that Chi-Chi's internal organs had suffered serious injuries. It was as if countless sharp blades were gently slicing through his internal organs, causing tiny cracks to appear on them, with blood oozing out bit by bit. He felt a sweet taste in his throat, as a mouthful of blood rolled up to his throat. Wu Qi took a deep breath and swallowed it back down. The reverse flow of blood had attacked his heart. Not only did Wu Qi spit out a mouthful of blood, he forcefully swallowed it back down. The innate energy in his body, which had just recovered a little, was thrown into chaos instantly, causing his internal injuries to worsen. His internal organs were shaken by the reverse flow of blood that he forcefully swallowed, and the cracks on his internal organs became even deeper. Eventually, Wu Qi still couldn't control the injuries in his body, causing him to spit out 3 mouthfuls of blood in a row. The blood he spat out was bright red, bringing with it a pungent smell of blood. It seemed that his prime energy essence had been damaged, and his injuries were extremely serious. Fortunately, Wu Qi had a strong foundation, and the amount of blood essence stored in his body was a few times greater than ordinary people. For ordinary people, these few mouthfuls of blood would require them to stay in bed for at least a few months, but he would only need a few days to recuperate. Coldly looking at the blood Wu Qi spat out on the deck, Nie Baihong snorted lightly. Those young masters from influential clans who came forward to greet Nie Baihong rose to their feet hastily, holding their heads up high and lining up neatly according to their seniority in heaven-breaking sword sect. Nie Baihong nodded his head lightly. From the corner of his eyes, he gazed at Lu Chengfeng, who was standing by the window at the highest point of the banquet hall. Slowly, he raised his hand and bowed to Lu Chengfeng, saying, "Greetings, Duke Yen Lu." Lu Chengfeng floated down and landed on the deck. He gave Wu Qi a worried look, then hastily cupped his fist and bowed to Nie Baihong, saying, "Chengfeng offers greetings, sect leader." "May I know what brings sect leader here today?" Indifferently, Nie Baihong gazed at Lu Chengfeng and said with a cold voice, "Just like what I said just now, I'm here to accept Wu Qi as my disciple." Nie Baihong turned to look at Wu Qi and said with a deep voice, "Among the 13 immortal sects of Great Yan Dynasty, the overall strength of Heaven-Breaking Sword sect is ranked number 1, and my cultivation base is at the later stage of Jin Dan realm. Today, I'm here to accept you as my disciple, and this is your good fortune. Quickly come up here and kowtow to me as your master. I don't want to stay in such a filthy place for too long." Before Nie Baihong could finish his words, a beautiful teenage girl, who looked to be about 15 or 16 years old, was irritated by the cold air contained in the sword beam unleashed by Wu Qi just now. She felt an itch in her nose, and suddenly sneezed. Nie Baihong's expression changed. He spun his head and glared at the teenage girl. A crisp sound of ripping rang out in the air, as the teenage girl's body was suddenly split into 2 from the middle. Her blood and flesh exploded and splattered on the floor of those people around her. A dead silence fell over the deck, especially those girls on the pleasure boats. Each of them had their hands tightly covering their mouths, and none of them dared to utter a single word. Among them, there were a few dancers who had a good relationship with the teenage girl. Although they were grief-stricken and frightened to death, they could only bite their own palms tightly and let big drops of tears fall from their eyes, not daring to make a single sound. Even these young masters from influential clans on the spot could kill them, and they could take away the lives of all the girls on this pleasure boat at any time, let alone Nie Baihong. He was the sect leader of an immortal sect, and these young masters from influential clans were just his juniors and apprentices. The life of a mere dancer was nothing in this situation. Abruptly, Lu Chengfeng clenched both his hands into fists. He gave Nie Baihong a quick glance, then slowly lowered his head. The dancer who was killed just now was not far away from him. A large amount of blood splashed onto Lu Chengfeng's soft brocade boots. Soaked in the blood, the green boots turned into a strange dark green color. Lu Chengfeng could feel the warm blood sticking to his feet, and it was slowly turning cold. Abruptly, Wu Qi took a step forward. He looked at the dead body of the teenage girl, clenched his teeth and stared at Nie Baihong as he asked, "What crime did she commit?" As if he had just heard the most unbelievable joke in the world, Nie Baihong looked at Wu Qi in astonishment and asked, "Do I need to convict her? She was disrespectful when I was speaking, and that is a capital crime. But why would you ask me such a question? Do I need an excuse to kill a lowly peasant?" Abruptly, the little bit of innate water energy left in Wu Qi's water meridians was activated, but immediately, a severe pain came from his internal organs, which nearly made him faint. his internal organs were still bleeding. When he forcibly circulated his internal energy, it was like a juicer, as the pressure forced his internal organs to secrete more blood. Wu Qi's vision darkened, his body swayed, and he nearly fell to the ground. Suddenly, a bright smile emerged on his pale face. Blinking his eyes, Wu Qi looked at Nie Baihong with a gentle expression. Respectfully, he walked before Nie Baihong. Forcing himself to keep himself from fainting, Wu Qi dropped to his knees before Nie Baihong and gave him a few kowtows. Your disciple pays respect to master. It is my good fortune in my previous life to be able to receive guidance from master. What master said is absolutely right. For a lowly peasant like her, it doesn't matter if she dies. Indeed, she doesn't need to be charged with any crime. With a respectful and even slightly admiring smile on his face, Wu Qi stared at Nie Baihong with an innocent and naive look, whose expression had become very gentle. With a bright smile on his face, he asked, "But, I have no idea why master would come here and take me as your disciple? I've long heard about the reputation of heaven-breaking swordsmanship sect. But, even in my dreams, I never dared to dream that I could become your disciple." The flattery made Nie Baihong feel comfortable from the bottom of his heart. The fact that he had just killed a dancer was like a drop of water sliding across an ice-cold diamond, leaving no trace in his heart. Looking at Wu Qi, whose face was filled with a smile, and whose eyes were filled with admiration, respect, and awe, Nie Baihong nodded satisfyingly. "Well, this is your good fortune. If not for Princess Zhang personally sending someone to beg me, I wouldn't have made an exception and accepted you as my disciple." Princess Zhang had actually sent someone to beg Nie Baihong to accept Wu Qi as his disciple? Wu Qi's heart trembled. Once again, he owed Princess Zhang a favor. But, never in his wildest dreams did he expect that the master that Princess Zhang had found for him out of kindness was actually someone like Nie Baihong. The moment they met, he had given Wu Qi a show of strength, nearly shattering his internal organs. Furthermore, he had secretly protected Tuoba Haofeng, allowing Tuoba Haofeng to escape smoothly. Then, he had even killed an innocent girl right in front of Wu Qi because of a trivial matter. It was better not to have such a master. However, facing the formidable sword energy emanating from Nie Baihong's body, Wu Qi's smile became even more amiable and adorable. Then he kowtowed to Nie Baihong and said smilingly, "So, it's Princess Zhang Li's kindness. Disciple finally understands now. Thank you, master, for coming here personally. Even if I have to sacrifice myself and break all my bones, I won't be able to repay your kindness." Nie Baihong felt more and more satisfied. Wu Qi's flattery had made him feel very comfortable. After all, which young master from those influential clans would say such flattering words to Wu Qi? Finally, a trace of a smile was squeezed out from Nie Baihong's stiff face. Slowly, he fished out a long sword from his storage ring and casually handed it over to Wu Qi. "Well, from today onwards, you're a disciple of Heaven-Breaking Sword Sect, one of my direct disciples. From now on, you'll come to Mount White Sun for a lecture at the beginning of every month. During the rest of the time, you're free to do whatever you want. I'll give you this sword. Take good care of it." Patting on Wu Qi's shoulder, Nie Baihong threw a thin palm-sized book called Qi Circulating Technique of 5 Elements to Wu Qi. After that, he spun around and flew away. He walked quickly on the surface of the river, leaving a trail of footprints on the surface of the river. Very soon, he disappeared into the distance. Nie Baihong's voice was heard coming from afar. "The Qi circulating technique of 5 elements is the foundation of our sect's sword technique. Cultivate it diligently and don't slack off. Anyone who secretly teaches it to an outsider will be killed without mercy. Anyone who covets the secret technique will have his entire clan executed. You must remember this." Reverently, Wu Qi picked up the thin book, bowed towards the direction where Nie Baihong had left. When he bowed, Wu Qi's eyes suddenly turned bloodshot, and his face was filled with a ferocious expression. When he straightened his back, his face was once again wearing the smile of a spring breeze. Chapter 84. On the small lake in the backyard of Duke Yanli's mansion, Wu Qi was lying quietly in a small boat. He had memorized the qi circulating technique of 5 elements by heart, liver, lung, spleen, and kidney, and had begun his preliminary cultivation. Using the heart, liver, lungs, spleen, and kidney as the core, 5 vast streams of energy were flowing through Wu Qi's 8 extraordinary meridians and 12 principal meridians. The qi circulating technique of 5 elements was the most traditional method of laying the foundation for a cultivator. It was to refine the essence of the blood and flesh into the innate energy, nurture the 5 internal organs, give birth to the 5 elements, and nurture the innate energy of 5 elements, strengthening the innate foundation of cultivating the Tao hidden in the 5 internal organs. With the innate energy of 5 elements, the innate spirit seed would grow into spirit sprout and spirit root, laying the foundation for the Tao of immortals. If it were some other warriors of Xiantian realm who wanted to cultivate the qi circulating technique of 5 elements, they would have to change the circulation route of the innate energy in their meridians, and this would be a huge trouble. 4 warriors who could cultivate to the realm of Xiantian realm, the circulation route of the innate energy in their meridians had already formed a fixed pattern, and had even fused with their blood and spirit. If they wanted to change the circulation route of the innate energy, it would be like trying to change the track of a speeding train, and it would be extremely difficult. Therefore, ordinary immortal sects were only willing to accept disciples who did not cultivate. Warriors of peak stage Hotian realm were already the limit. For a warrior like Wu Qi who had stepped into the realm of Xiantian realm, if not because of Princess Zhang Li's great influence, it would be impossible for Nie Baihong to accept him as a disciple. Putting everything else aside, if a warrior of Xiantian realm wanted to cultivate the qi circulating technique of 5 elements, it would take him at least 3 to 5 years of hard work. That was the reason why Nie Baihong left a cultivation manual to Wu Qi casually, as he didn't think highly of Wu Qi's future in cultivation. He was just giving face to Princess Zhang Li, and that was why he came to accept Wu Qi as his disciple. As for whether Wu Qi could achieve any results in his cultivation, it had nothing to do with him. But for Wu Qi, it was not a problem at all. The technique he was cultivating came from the scroll of stealing, and the core meridians he cultivated were the 7 stealing heaven meridians in both of his arms. As for the 8 extraordinary meridians and 12 standard meridians in his body, they were completely empty, without any innate energy left in them. He only needed to follow the qi circulating technique of 5 elements to absorb a bit of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, and use his spiritual sense, which was several times more powerful than an ordinary person's, to guide the spiritual energy to circulate in his meridians for 36 cycles, thus laying a solid foundation for the qi circulating technique of 5 elements. The meridians in Wu Qi's body were unobstructed, and the width and strength of his meridians were dozens of times that of an ordinary person. In just a few days of cultivation, his cultivation of the qi circulating technique of 5 elements had reached the level of 30 years, and he had achieved a preliminary balance of the minor 5 elements in his 5 viscera. With the nourishment of the genuine qi of 5 elements, Wu Qi could clearly sense that there was a vigorous vitality growing in his internal organs with his soul sense. As long as his cultivation of the qi circulating technique of 5 elements broke through to the Xiantian realm, he would be able to nurture the spirit sprouts and spirit roots in his 5 viscera, which were brought about by his innate spirit seed. That would lay the foundation for him to pursue the Tao of immortality. However, to be honest, in Wu Qi's opinion, although the qi circulating technique of 5 elements could allow one to reach the peak stage of Xiantian realm, it was too crude and shallow. No matter it was the quality of the cultivated innate energy, the speed of accumulating innate energy, or the effect of nurturing and nourishing the 5 viscera, they were all very weak. Compared to the techniques found in the Source of Water chapter, the qi circulating technique of 5 elements was just trash, the kind of trash that had been soaked in the latrine for several dozens of years. So, this is the basic qi cultivating technique that Heaven Breaking Sword sect is so proud of? He laughed mockingly, casually shoving the small booklet into his storage ring. After that, Wu Qi took out the long sword given to him by Nie Baihong. The long sword had a pale green hue, and its blade looked like a ripple of water. It was bright and dazzling and gave off a sharp feeling when looking at it. The length of the long sword was 3 feet and 6 inches, and it could be considered as a big and sturdy fellow among all the flying swords. Compared to the ordinary flying swords, which were only 3 to 5 inches long and 1 foot long, it was really huge. However, although the flying sword was huge, it was still a lower-grade magical item. It was no different from the few small flying swords in Wu Qi's hands. It was made from an ordinary 100-years-old dark steel mixed with a little bit of dark copper from the bottom of the ocean, and its quality could not be considered as good. As for the formations engraved on its blade, they were the wood element sky sweeping array and the grand white gunmetal iron slashing array, which were the most common lower-grade magical items. Of course, due to the huge size of the sword, there were 12 sky sweeping arrays engraved on its blade, which were 9 more than the ordinary lower-grade magical flying swords, and 6 iron slashing arrays, which were 3 more than the ordinary lower-grade magical flying swords. Therefore, once this flying sword was unleashed, its speed would be 30% faster than the ordinary lower-grade flying swords, and its sharpness would be at least 50% higher. However, such a little improvement in its attributes could not change the fact that this flying sword was just a lower-grade magical item. If Wu Qi's cultivation base was strong enough to produce the Samadhi true flame in his body, he could use his divine sense to carve formations on the flying sword. Then, with the knowledge he obtained from Scroll of Stealing, he could carve 108 higher-grade formations on the body of this huge flying sword. With that, he could at least forcibly upgrade this flying sword to the level of an upper-grade magical item. Using a mere lower-grade flying sword as a favor? Do you think I've never seen anything good? Narrowing his eyes, Wu Qi tried to recall the vast amount of formations and methods used to craft various magical treasures and spirit items when he inherited the Scroll of Stealing. He could not help but let out a faint sigh. The Samadhi True Flame was an ability that only human immortals could possess. Carefully, Wu Qi raised up the sword edge and gently licked it with the tip of his tongue. After that, he sprayed a mouthful of blood essence onto the sword edge, branding a thread of divine sense into this flying sword named Autumn Water. Then, he performed a profound sword incantation gesture and pointed at the flying sword. A sword cry rang out, and the flying sword soared up into the sky, leaving behind a short cold beam as it flew up into the sky, circling 3 times above Wu Qi's head. For a cultivator of the Meridian cultivating tier, it was considered pretty good that his flying sword could soar into the sky. With the strength of Wu Qi's soul, which was a few times stronger than the others, the fact that the flying sword could fly and pierce through the air within a radius of 200 feet around him showed that it possessed a certain level of combat strength. At first glance, he could be considered as a qualified sword immortal. Behind the qi circulating technique of 5 elements, there were 3 most basic sword incantations, and the most basic sword techniques of thrusting, spinning, and slashing. However, Wu Qi did not pay any attention to these trivial sword incantations and sword techniques. What he was using now was a sword technique inherited from Scroll of Stealing, which was far more advanced than the sword incantation of qi circulating technique of 5 elements. After wielding the flying sword for a while, he kept the Autumn Water sword back into his storage ring. After that, Wu Qi swallowed an innate water pill, and with the power of the pill, he strengthened the innate energy cultivated by the qi circulating technique of 5 elements by 30%. After that, he closed his eyes and began to snore contentedly. In the pavilion next to the lake, Lu Qingfeng, who was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed, opened his eyes and looked enviously at the cold beam left behind by Wu Qi's flying sword in the sky. He breathed out a faint sigh. Carefully, he took out a few pieces of earth element materials from his storage bag, then slowly burned them with the little 25th lamp. He began to think if he should use his connections to find an immortal sect and join it. However, among all 13 immortal sects of Great Yan Dynasty, which one of them was an expert in the art of formations? Therefore, Lu Qingfeng decided to find out more about them. A few days had passed, and it was the first day of the month. Wu Qi suddenly recalled what Nye Baihong told him, that he had to go to Mount White Sun and listen to the lecture of Heaven-Breaking Sword sect on the first day of every month. Currently, Lu Qingfeng was carrying out all the tasks in his hands in an orderly manner, and it wouldn't make a difference whether Wu Qi was there or not. Therefore, Wu Qi simply asked for a day's leave from Lu Chengfeng, borrowed a guide from Yan Bugui, and began his journey towards Mount White Sun outside Ji City. The area of several tens of thousands of miles outside Ji City was filled with flatlands and hills, and only a few beautiful mountains could be seen. In this world where mountain ranges stretched for several tens of thousands of miles, these mountains outside Ji City could only be described as small pebbles. They were really inconspicuous. However, as the saying goes, the height of a mountain doesn't matter if it's an immortal. 270 miles to the south of Ji City, Mount White Sun, the tallest mountain was only 3,000 feet tall, and its circumference was only about 100 miles. It could be considered as one of the famous blessed lands of Great Yan Dynasty. 600 years ago, the founding ancestral master of heaven-breaking sword sect, Nye Yaonu, was lucky enough to encounter an immortal's fate in Mount White Sunday. She entered a cave left behind by an immortal, inherited the legacy of that immortal, and founded heaven-breaking sword sect. Although it was founded less than 600 years ago, heaven-breaking sword sect had caught up from behind. Relying on its formidable overall strength, it had firmly occupied the position as the #1 immortal sect among all 13 immortal sects of Great Yan Dynasty. Mount White Sun used to be a place where the rich and idle people of Great Yan Dynasty would go for an outing. But, since Nye Yaonu founded heaven-breaking sword sect here, it had become the headquarters of heaven-breaking sword sect. Today, Mount White Sun was shrouded in a layer of white mist, and a defensive formation had tightly covered the mountain range of 100 miles in circumference. Led by the guide, Wu Qi rode on a single-horned deer and came to the front of Mount White Sunday. There was a rugged path paved with stone slabs, and a simple and crude archway made of pure wood. This was the location of the headquarters of heaven-breaking sword sect. Amidst the white mist, 4 young men clad in white robes, their faces filled with arrogance, were seen sitting on a long bench under the archway, their legs crossed and chatting with each other. Because of the barrier of the formation, the voices of these men couldn't be heard. Therefore, Wu Qi had no idea what they were talking about. But by looking at the strange smile on their faces, which any man would understand, Wu Qi knew that they were not talking about some pure and innocent business. He coughed and leaped off the mount. Wu Qi came before the archway, cupped his fist and bowed to the 4 young men standing several tens of feet away from him through the defensive formation. Fellow disciples, I, Wu Qi, offer my greetings. Please do me a favor, as Wu Qi is here to listen to the lecture. The few young men were taken aback. Chi rose to his feet, fixing his eyes on Wu Qi. One of them raised a jade medallion and waved it in front of Wu Qi. The cloud in front of Wu Qi blinked and blinked, opening up a wide path. 4 young men in white robes walked out from the formation, giving Wu Qi a scrutinizing glance from top to bottom. After the time it took to finish a pot of tea, the young man who activated the formation sneered at Wu Qi and said, "So, you're Wu Qi? The hanger-on of Duke Yan Li's mansion, Wu Qi? So, you're the one who killed Taba Qingye and wounded Tuoba Haofeng?" Upon hearing this, Wu Qi knew that this man did not speak in a friendly tone. He smiled reservedly, nodded his head and said, "Yes, I am Wu Qi. However, between Taba Qingye and Tuoba Haofeng, one was killed, and the other was wounded. It was Wu Qi who had no other choice." The young man stretched out his hand hastily and stopped Wu Qi from continuing. He sneered and said, "Don't bother explaining, we won't listen to you, and you don't have the right to ask us to listen to your explanation. Whether Taba Qingye and Tuoba Haofeng are dead or alive has nothing to do with us. But, aren't you the one who wounded Haoying Fenglong?" Wu Qi was struck dumb again. They knew Haoying Fenglong? The one who wounded Haoying Fenglong was Lu Qingfeng. But, with the friendship between Wu Qi and Lu Qingfeng, would it make any difference who wounded Haoying Fenglong? Chuckling, Wu Qi nodded his head and said, "The one who wounded Haoying Fenglong is Wu Qi. May I ask what advice do you have for me?" The 4 young men in white robes exchanged a glance, then sneered together. Clanging noises of swords rang out, as 4 flying swords flew up into the sky from Chi. Grinning coldly, the 4 young men said, "If you want to enter the mountain and listen to the lecture, You'll have to defeat us." Not allowing Wu Qi to say anything, the 4 flying swords thrust towards him at the same time. Chapter 85. Looking at the 4 sword beams, Wu Qi could not help but feel surprised. These 4 young men were so arrogant, and he thought they had some incredible cultivation base. But now, he realized they were nothing special. The sword beams were only a few feet long, and their speed was not even as fast as Wu Qi's movement technique. Let's fight then. After staying in Ji City for so many days, Wu Qi had learned some information about the 13 immortal sects of Great Yan Dynasty. When the disciples fought among themselves, not only would they not be punished by the sect rules, they would also be strongly supported by the seniors of the sect. As long as they didn't use poison or sneak attack from behind, even if they killed their fellow disciples in a head-on fight, the sect would not punish them. Sneering, Wu Qi didn't care about the background of these few fellows. With a sway of his body, he dodged the 4 sword beams and quickly came before the 4 young men. A series of thunder-like kicks were unleashed, and one of the young men had his lower body kicked by Wu Qi. Among these 4 young men, one of them had the cultivation base of respiration of Xiantian realm, while the other 3 were peak stage Hotian realm cultivators. But no matter what cultivation base they had, the most vulnerable part of a man was still the most lethal part. With just one kick from Wu Qi, the 4 young men were sent flying 30 feet away. But as they possessed a pretty good movement skill, they managed to land on the ground steadily. Strangely, they covered their lower bodies with both hands, spread their legs apart as if they were standing in a horse stance. Hissing sounds could be heard coming from their mouths as they stared at Wu Qi with a very strange look. Slowly, their eyeballs bulged out from their eye sockets. The sword beams that failed to hit Wu Qi were hovering above his head in a sluggish manner, not moving at all. Without hesitation, Wu Qi grabbed all 4 lower-grade flying swords and shoved them into his storage ring. He looked sympathetically at the 4 young men, whose faces were slowly turning pale. With a soft voice, he said, "If it hurts, just scream it out. I've kicked that part of your body, I know it hurts. We're all from the same sect, so I won't laugh at you. If you want to scream, just scream it out." A high-pitched scream rose into the sky. The 4 white-robed young men covered their nether regions and rolled on the ground. Their faces suddenly turned purplish red, and cold sweat appeared all over their bodies. Leisurely, Wu Qi walked past them, walking along the stone path and heading up the mountain. Just now, he had a sense of propriety. The lower bodies of the 4 people would at most be swollen for a few days. There wouldn't be any sequelae. At most, they would feel a lot of pain now. After giving a few instructions to the guide, asking him to wait for him outside the mountain gate, Wu Qi walked along the path up the mountain for more than 1,000 feet. Suddenly, he looked at a big rock on the side of the road and laughed. "Hey, you've been looking for a long time, haven't you?" Just now, when he kicked those 4 youths, he heard someone take a deep breath on this big rock, so he knew that someone was hiding here. A green light flashed, and a young man in a white robe emerged from the green light. He looked at Wu Qi in surprise, then looked at the green jade invisibility talisman in his hand that was carved in the shape of a leaf, and frowned deeply. With a cold snort, the young man jumped off the big rock and took out a small booklet with a golden silk cover from his sleeve. Using a thin pen, he quickly wrote a few lines of words on it. "You guys can't even handle a new disciple who hasn't even officially joined the sect, and you guys have learned so many tricks of heaven-breaking swordsmanship sect. All 4 of you will be demoted from 2nd-class disciple to 3rd-class disciple. After your duty today, go to the punishment hall and report to the elders yourselves." Yelling at the 4 young men who were twitching on the ground, the white-robed young man raised his chin and glanced at Wu Qi out of the corner of his eye. "You're Wu Qi, the new disciple of the sect leader? You're pretty good. All the new disciples are 3rd-class disciples, but since you've defeated 4 2nd-class disciples, your status will be promoted to 2nd-class disciple today." He took out another booklet from his sleeve and threw it over to Wu Qi. With a cold voice, the white-robed young man said, "I'm Haoying Fengying, the elder brother of Haoying Fenglong. For the past 3 months, I've been in charge of investigating and recording every single word and action of heaven-breaking swordsmanship sect's disciples. These are the rules of our sect, and all the things that you need to pay attention to. Memorize them first, and don't break any rules. If that happens, no one can save you." Howing Fengying snorted a cold breath from his nostrils, gave Wu Qi a disdainful glance, then turned around and was about to leave. Wu Qi hastily caught up to Howing Fengying, grabbed his sleeve. Howing Fengying's face darkened. He turned around, stared at Wu Qi, and snapped, "Wu Qi, what are you trying to do?" Clang. The sword hanging on Howing Fengying's waist suddenly leaped out from the sword case. It was about 1 foot long, glowing with a dark green light and emanating a cold air. It was a mid-tier magical item, a flying sword. Howing Fengying's cultivation base was quite mature, having reached the physique-strengthening tier of innate realm. A powerful innate energy surged into the flying sword, and suddenly, a few inches thick sword beam burst out from the flying sword. Wu Qi threw a glance at the flying sword that emitted a cold air, then smiled. He pulled Howing Fengying's arm and asked, "Are you Howing Fenglong's elder brother?" Howing Fengying answered with a cold voice, "Yes, I am. What are you going to do?" Wu Qi smiled again. Since Lu Qingfeng had slapped Howing Fenglong on the pleasure boat, he had learned about the current situation of Howing clan through Yen Bugui. It was true that Howing Fenglong was Howing Fenglong's elder brother, but he was just the son of a concubine. Thus, it was impossible for him to inherit the power and position of Howing clan. The best result would be that he could own a small piece of land in Howing clan's territory and live a carefree life for the rest of his life. With a bright smile on his face, Wu Qi grabbed Howing Fengying's wrist. Howing Fengying was startled. The sword hanging on his waist flew out from the sword case with a loud clang, leaving an 8-feet-long green beam in the air, and was about to thrust towards Wu Qi. Hastily, Wu Qi shouted, "Don't be hasty, listen to me. You help me gain a foothold in heaven-breaking sword sect, and I'll help you deal with Howing Fenglong. Those who are not the legitimate eldest son are not allowed to inherit the clan's property. But there are always exceptions, don't you think?" The sword beam returned to the sword case. Howing Fengying gazed at Wu Qi coldly for a while, sneered and said, "What can you help me with?" Wu Qi said without hesitation, "However much you can help me, my young master and I can help you. I know nothing about heaven-breaking sword sect, and it is not easy for me to gain a foothold here. As for you, based on your birth mother's background, don't tell me you want to be a wealthy man for the rest of your life?" After a brief moment of silence, Howing Fengying laughed as well. He held Wu Qi's hand, lowered his voice and said, "It's worth it for me to exchange my position with senior brother and come here to wait for you. I thought you wouldn't come back today, but I didn't expect that you would really come." Deal. Wu Qi squeezed Howing Fengying's hand, smiled and said, "You've been waiting for me here? We're both smart men, so let's cut to the chase. You help me and I'll help you. In the future, in G City, not only me, my young master will have to rely on many friends as well." Both men smiled at each other. Without saying anything, they had already made up their minds. Hand in hand, both men walked along the stone path towards the depth of Mount White Sunday. Along the way, Howing Fengying told Wu Qi about the situation of heaven-breaking sword sect in detail, and these were the information that Wu Qi urgently needed. After all, even in the secret archives of Scouting Office, there was no detailed information about the 13 immortal sects of Great Yen Dynasty. Even if there was, it was not something that Yen Bugui could easily access, as it was a top secret of Great Yen Dynasty's strategic level. According to Howing Fengying's introduction, the two people with the greatest power in heaven-breaking sword sect today were the Grand Elders, Nie Yaonu and Yen Li. Nie Yaonu was the founding ancestral master of heaven-breaking sword sect, and also the birth mother of the current sect leader, Nie Baihong. 100 years ago, after she handed over the position of sect leader to Nie Baihong, she had been living in seclusion and cultivating in the back of the mountain. 100 years ago, Nie Yaonu had broken through the peak of Jin Dan realm. As for Yen Li, he was the lineal grandson of Emperor Yen Dan, the third son of Yen Qijuan, the crown prince of Yen Yen. 2 months after Nie Yaonu accidentally discovered the immortal's cave left behind by an immortal in Mount White Sun, he married Nie Yaonu. It was said that the relationship between the couple was not very good. Apart from Nye Yaonu, his first wife, Yenli had no less than 200 concubines and concubines. Nye Yaonu was the founding ancestral master of heaven-breaking sword sect, the spiritual leader of the sect. On the other hand, Yenli, as well as many elders who were close to him, were the men with the real power in heaven-breaking sword sect. There were a total of 36 elders in heaven-breaking sword sect's elder council, and all of them were human immortals who had cultivated the Jin Dan realm. Among them, 27 were elders who were close to Yenli. These 27 elders all came from the imperial clan of Great Yen Dynasty, Jing clan, Qin clan, Gao clan, and other influential clans. As for the current sect leader, Nye Baihong, it seemed to be a taboo topic. Haoying Fengying opened his mouth, but no words came out. Then, he changed the topic and began to introduce some other things that happened in heaven-breaking sword sect. For example, the disciples of heaven-breaking sword sect, like Wu Qi, who just joined the sect, were all third-class disciples. Unless they contributed some meritorious service to heaven-breaking sword sect, or defeated some higher-ranked disciples, they would never be able to get a promotion. Therefore, they could only cultivate the basic energy cultivating technique of heaven-breaking sword sect, the qi circulating technique of 5 elements. Only after they broke through the first class from the third class, second class, and finally became an inner sect disciple of heaven-breaking sword sect, could they have access to the cultivation scriptures of heaven-breaking sword sect. And only the core disciples among the inner sect disciples could inherit the most orthodox sword technique of heaven-breaking sword sect. For example, Nye Baihong alone had 3,000 disciples. Among them, there were less than 300 second-class disciples, over 70 first-class disciples, 13 inner sect disciples, and none of the core disciples. These 3,000 disciples were all the more important disciples from the influential clans of Great Yen Dynasty. Those disciples like Wu Qi who did not come from an influential clan could be counted with 2 hands. Basically, it was the same situation in all 13 immortal sects of Great Yen Dynasty. The members of the imperial clan with the surname of Yen held most of the real power, and their disciples were all from the wealthy and influential clans of Great Yen Dynasty. Unless an ordinary citizen had a heaven-defying talent, he or she would never be accepted as a disciple. Even if there were some heaven-defying geniuses among the ordinary citizens, it was unknown if he or she could survive until the day he or she finished his apprenticeship. At least, in the 20 years since Haoying Fengying joined the sect, he had witnessed with his own eyes the accidental death of several hundred so-called geniuses who came from ordinary families. Listening to Haoying Fengying's description of the situation in the sect, Wu Qi felt his heart tighten again. It seemed like every step he took in heaven-breaking sword sect was filled with trepidation, and he had to be extra careful. While talking, both of them walked at a brisk pace for nearly an hour. Finally, they arrived at the base of heaven-breaking sword sect, which was located at the core of Mount White Sunday. Surrounded by mountains, there was a basin with a diameter of tens of miles. A couple dozens of palaces of different sizes were erected in this basin. This was the base of heaven-breaking sword sect. Haoying Fengying grabbed Wu Qi, pulled him and ran towards the nearest palaces. There was still some time before today's lecture. The sect's elders would only appear at noon to give a lecture. The most important thing now was to help Wu Qi go through all the procedures required for a new disciple. First of all, he had to test Wu Qi's route of cultivation. Chapter 86. The palace where heaven-breaking sword sect tested the bone structure of new disciples was called the Heaven's Will Palace. It meant that the foundation of all cultivators was the predestined Heaven's Will. The Heaven's Will could never be defied. If the Heaven's Will determined that one could become an immortal, then one could do it. If the Heaven's Will determined that one did not have the qualification to become an immortal, then one could only play with mud in the mortal world. Because of this, the overall atmosphere of the Heaven's Will Palace was very oppressive and heavy. The pitch-black palace was entirely built using mountain rocks with a very high content of iron, and the words written on the plaque hanging in front of the door were gray and without any luster. It was as if the Heaven's Will Palace was pressing heavily on one's body, something that could never be defied, changed, or transcended. One could only endure it passively. Haoying Fengying kept explaining to Wu Qi. Not only the Heavens Will Palace of Heaven-Breaking Sword sect had the same design, the palaces used by all 13 immortal sects of Great Yen Dynasty to test the bone structure and innate talent of the new disciples had the same design. It was as if Great Yen Dynasty was purposely declaring something, and the meaning behind it could only be comprehended by oneself, and no one could tell it to them. Wu Qi walked along the path paved with black stones for a long distance, and finally arrived at the palace where the Heavens Will Palace tested the bone structure of new disciples. The palace was very deep and wide, measuring over 1,000 feet in both length and width, but only less than 20 feet in height. Even when standing outside the palace, it gave off a very heavy oppressive feeling. But when they entered the palace, the oppressive feeling was at least 100 times stronger. The four walls of such a wide and low hall were pitch black, and the ceiling and floor were as black as ink. Yet, there were only 6 candlesticks placed in the middle of the palace, and a few large butter candles were lit sparsely on top of them. The light in the palace was very dim. A few old men were sitting on cushions at the far end of the palace, chatting idly. They looked like ghosts in the dim palace. Haoying Fengying brought Wu Qi to the far end of the palace, bowed respectfully at the few old men. The aura emanating from these few old men was very obscure, and their skin was extremely shriveled and withered. It was as if their grayish skin would turn into ashes with just a little poke of a finger. All of them were at the embryonic breath tier of Xiantian realm, and all of their spirit, qi, and spirit were gathered inside their bodies. They were all peak-level Xiantian realm martial artists. Among them, there was an old man with a sharp life force faintly discernible in his body. He was a top-notch expert who had 1 foot in the Jin Dan realm. As long as he could take the step, he would transform from a Xiantian Taoist to a human immortal, which would increase his lifespan by at least 800 years. 1 step mortal, 1 step immortal. Among the 5 old men who were chatting idly, this old man's status was clearly the most important. The other 4 old men seemed to regard him as their leader. When the old man saw Haoying Fengying, he let out a dry laugh and said, "Oh, it's you, Fengying. Aren't you in charge of patrolling the mountain today? Why did he come to the Heavens Will Palace? Who is this kid? A new disciple? I haven't heard that the elders have accepted any new disciples." Haoying Fengying laughed. He turned to the old man and said, "Third Grand Uncle, you may not know this, but this is Wu Qi. The sect leader has just accepted him as a disciple a few days ago." It was Princess Zhangli who personally sent someone to greet the sect leader. Princess Zhangli said that if the sect leader refused to accept Wu Qi as his disciple, she would cut off the supply of energy stones and swords for this year. Therefore, the sect leader personally came to accept him as a disciple. "Oh," answered Chi-Chi and curiously looked at Wu Qi. Haoying Fengying's third grand uncle, Haoying Xiong, nodded his head in surprise and said, "So, it was Princess Zhangli who gave the order? I can't believe she would actually do something like this. Didn't Bai Xiaoguan offend her 3 years ago?" As a result, all the energy stones and magical items that Bai Xiaoguan should have received for that year were thrown from the upper reaches of Myriad Red River to the lower reaches by Princess Zhangli. The few old men laughed at Chi-Chi. Haoying Xiong waved his hand at Wu Qi, smiled and said, "Since he is the new disciple of the sect leader, it doesn't matter if he has a bone frame or not. But, since he has come to Heavens Will Palace, it is a good thing for him to have a better understanding of his own bone frame." Haoying Xiong smacked his lips, smiled and said, "If he really has the bone frame of cultivating immortality, he should put in more effort. Perhaps, he can form the Jin Dan and exchange it for a few hundred years of freedom. But if he doesn't have the bone frame of cultivating immortality, since he is still the disciple of the sect leader, no one will drive him out. Borrowing the name of Heaven-Breaking Sword Sect, you can bully the men and women in G City for over 100 years. That is quite a pleasant thing." Cold sweat broke out on Wu Qi's forehead when he heard what Haoying Xiong said. Sure enough, Haoying Xiong was straightforward with his words, without any hypocrisy. He was right. There were 3,000 disciples under Nye Baihong, and not every one of them was a talented cultivator. At least half of them didn't have the talent of cultivating Dao. Nevertheless, these 3,000 disciples were still the disciples of Heaven-Breaking Sword Sect, just like Haoying Fenglong. He didn't even have a strong cultivation base, but it didn't stop him from becoming the disciple of Heaven-Breaking Sword Sect, and continued to be the first successor of Haoying clan. Haoying Xiong and the few old men continued to talk nonsense for a while. Suddenly, they recalled the purpose of Wu Qi's visit. Haoying Xiong pressed a few times on the ground. A few thick and heavy tiles on the ground slowly moved away, and a stone platform slowly rose up from the ground. On top of the square platform stood a white crystal pillar, about 10 feet tall and as thick as a water bucket. Wu Qi recognized it. It was the Yuan Ling crystal mentioned in Scroll of Stealing, which was specially used to test the bone structure and talent of a cultivator. Without saying anything, Wu Qi stepped onto the stone platform, placed his right hand on the Yuan Ling crystal, and injected a stream of innate energy into it. A watery gleam flickered on the surface of the Yuan Ling crystal, and a pale blue gleam emerged. Haoying Xiong nodded his head slowly and said, It's a spirit seed, that's not bad. No matter how far the spirit seed can develop in the future, it's better than nothing. Furthermore, it's a water spirit seed, so I can cultivate the sword technique of the Azure Water Sword. But, if it's a earth or fire spirit seed, it would be troublesome. Shakily, Haoying Xiong rose to his feet and walked onto the stone platform. He performed an incantation gesture and cast a hand incantation on the Yuan Ling crystal. A large sheet of nearly transparent white gleam surged out from the Yuan Ling crystal, enveloping Wu Qi within it. Wu Qi felt that all his blood and qi were flowing at an incredible speed under the stimulation of the white gleam, and all his energy essence was rushing towards his spiritual ocean without his control, forcefully crashing into a mysterious place in his spiritual ocean. A faint cry rang out. A ray of light burst out from between Wu Qi's brows, and an indistinct shadow gradually emerged. Haoying Xiong took out a ruler from his sleeve, pointing it at the shadow and measuring it. After that, he nodded his head smilingly and praised, "Innate nascent embryo is 5 feet tall, wonderful. This is an upper-tier innate nascent embryo." With a thought in Wu Qi's mind, all the information about innate nascent embryo that he found in Scroll of Stealing quickly emerged in his mind. Innate nascent embryo had nothing to do with Taoists of Xiantian realm or human immortals of Jindan realm. However, after cultivating into the nascent soul realm, the so-called Earth immortals of nascent soul realm, their achievement would have a great relationship with the innate nascent embryo. The innate nascent embryo would decide the highest achievement an Earth immortal could achieve, because the highest height a nascent soul could achieve was directly related to the height of the innate nascent embryo. When an innate nascent embryo was 3 feet tall, the strongest nascent soul would be 3 feet tall. When an innate nascent embryo was 6 feet tall, the strongest nascent soul would be 6 feet tall. When a nascent soul was 1 inch tall, its energy would be 3 times stronger, depending on the level of the cultivation technique it was cultivating. If the energy of a 1-inch nascent soul was divided into 1, the energy of a 3 feet nascent soul would be 90, and a 6 feet nascent soul would be 180. Generally speaking, the tallest innate nascent embryo of an ordinary cultivator was 6 feet tall. 1 foot was lower grade, 2 feet was lower grade, 3 feet was lower grade, 4 feet was middle grade, 5 feet was upper grade, and 6 feet was upper grade. As for those whose nascent embryo was over 6 feet tall, they were destined to be gold immortals. Wu Qi's innate nascent embryo was 5 feet tall. Among all the cultivators, this was a rare and excellent potential. If he could cultivate into the nascent soul realm, his achievement was destined to be greater than the others. Wu Qi smiled faintly. He did not put the matter of innate nascent embryo in his heart. For those who were cultivating the Scroll of Stealing, the innate nascent embryo was definitely not the deciding factor that would restrict their future achievement. Even if his innate nascent embryo was only 3 inches tall, it would not affect him at all. There was nothing under the heaven that could not be stolen, and this innate nascent embryo was also something that could be stolen from the Scroll of Stealing. As long as he could steal a thread of innate fortune energy from someone, Wu Qi's innate nascent embryo could keep growing and growing stronger. Not to mention 6 feet tall, it was even possible for him to have a nascent embryo that was 6,000 feet tall. When Haoying Xiong saw the disapproving expression on Wu Qi's face, he thought Wu Qi did not know the importance of innate nascent embryo. Therefore, he quickly explained the pros and cons to him. In the end, Haoying Xiong even told Wu Qi with mixed emotions that his innate nascent embryo was only 3 feet and 6 inches tall, which was considered as a middle grade. If one day he could cultivate into the nascent soul realm, his future achievement would be unpredictable. At least, when facing the heavenly tribulation, the stronger the nascent soul was, the more confident he would be in transcending the heavenly tribulation. The last test was when Haoying Xiong took out a thumb-sized lower-grade water elemental energy stone, which was polished into a square shape. The amount of energy contained within this energy stone was fixed. Haoying Xiong wanted Wu Qi to absorb the energy within 1 hour with all his might. Exercising the technique of Qi circulating technique of 5 elements, Wu Qi held the energy stone in his palm and slowly absorbed the faint energy contained within it. The technique of Qi circulating technique of 5 elements was not a good cultivation technique. In just 1 hour, Wu Qi had only absorbed 30 portions of energy from the energy stone, and only 9 portions of energy remained in his meridians and transformed into innate energy of 5 elements. In other words, Wu Qi could only retain 30% of energy. When he absorbed 100 portions of energy from the outside world, he would be able to transform 30% of it into innate energy. Faced with this result, Wu Qi felt that the technique of Qi circulating technique of 5 elements was the trashiest cultivation technique, while Haoying Xiong and the others kept nodding their heads in satisfaction. To retain 30% of energy could be considered as a pretty good cultivation talent. Among the 3,000 apprentices under Nie Baihong, some of them who possessed spirit seeds could not even retain 20% of their energy. All in all, Haoying Xiong and the other 4 apprentices gave their evaluation of Wu Qi's bone structure and talent. With a spirit seed, one could cultivate the Tao. With a water elemental spirit seed, one could cultivate the sword technique of the Azure Water Sword in Heaven Breaking Sword sect. With a 5 feet tall nascent embryo, an excellent talent, and a 30% retention of energy, he could already be considered as an excellent apprentice. All in all, according to Haoying Xiong, Wu Qi was an excellent talent that was suitable to develop in Heaven Breaking Sword sect. As long as he did not make any mistakes, he would be able to form the Jin Dan in the future. At such a young age, he had already reached the realm of Xiantian, so it was possible for him to form the Jin Dan within 100 years. Before Haoying Xiong could finish his words, a loud laughter was heard coming from the entrance of the Grand Hall. "I can't believe there is such a beautiful talent here. Who is your master? Why don't you become my apprentice?" Along with the laughter, an old man clad in a black robe strode into the hall. Chapter 87. Ear-piercing slicing sounds rang out incessantly, causing the empty hall to reverberate with waves of reverberations. Behind the old man who walked into the hall, there were 6 dark swords spinning slowly, forming a harmonious and flawless wheel of swords. Invisible sword intents burst out from the swords, slashing across the pitch-black floor of the hall and producing a large amount of sparks. Wherever the old man passed, sparks would fly in all directions, and the jarring noises would make one's eardrums hurt and their brains roll. Just like Nie Baihong, this old man was also a human immortal of Jin Dan realm, and a very strong one at that. The 6 sword shadows behind him were not real swords, but the strange signs of the overflowing and condensing of core qi in his body. Just like how Nie Baihong left footprints on the surface of the river, they were the signs of a human immortal activating the power of the great Tao of heaven and earth and manifesting them. However, compared to the strange sign formed by Nie Baihong, the 6 swords behind the old man were undoubtedly more aggressive and aggressive. If not because the floor of Heaven's Will Palace was protected by a formation, the old man would have destroyed at least half of Heaven's Will Palace along the way. Upon seeing this old man, Haoying Xiong and the others quickly rose to their feet and bowed, addressing him as Elder Qin. Haoying Fenging quickly bowed to the old man as well, then secretly transmitted his voice to Wu Qi. "Qin Shu Win, the elder of Heaven Breaking Sword Sect's Punishment Hall, the youngest brother of the current clan leader of Qin clan of Great Yan Dynasty, the grand uncle of Scouting Office's Central Wind Guard, Qin Qingshui. His main cultivation technique is the Raging Thunder Sword of Heaven Breaking Sword sect. Quickly bow to him, quickly bow to him. Howing Fengying dared not to raise his head, but condensed his voice into a thin thread and transmitted it into Wu Qi's ears. Qin Qingshui's grand uncle? Wu Qi suddenly recalled the long donkey-like face of Qin Qingshui, and on the day when Lu Chengfeng was assassinated, Qin Qingshui actually wanted to arrest Lu Chengfeng and interrogate him. Qin Qingshui was definitely not Wu Qi's friend, so it was obvious that his granduncle would not fall in love with Wu Qi at first sight. Bowing deeply, Wu Qi turned to Qin Shuwen, smiled and said, "Wu Qi offers greeting, Elder Qin." The so-called beautiful talent was really an overpraise. Wu Qi is just an ordinary warrior. He only joined the heaven-splitting swordsmanship sect for a 1 in a million chance. I don't deserve to be called an elder. Qin Shuwen walked slowly and came before Wu Qi. Suddenly, he pressed his palm onto Wu Qi's shoulder. He laughed out loud and said, "You deserve it, you deserve it. I've been listening outside the main hall for a long time." A 5-feet-long nascent embryo, and 30% of its spiritual energy is a top-notch cultivation aptitude. I specialize in Berserk Lightning, which is a variant of the metal element sword technique. You are a water element spiritual seed. Metal begets water, so I can teach you. When he pressed his palm down, an invisible force of thunder rushed into Wu Qi's body, attacking his entire body through his meridians. With Wu Qi's cultivation base, the force of thunder could not harm his life, but it was more than enough to injure his meridians, and even hurt his cultivation foundation. If not handled properly, the force of thunder could even shatter all his meridians, and it might even ruin his future of cultivation. Wu Qi was startled, and hastily took a step back. However, Qin Shuwen followed closely like a shadow. He didn't move at all, but his right palm was pressed tightly on Wu Qi's shoulder, following closely behind Wu Qi for a few steps, never leaving Wu Qi's side. Qin Shuwen let out a long laugh and said, "Good boy, Wu Qi, it's your good fortune that I've taken a fancy to you. Now, kneel down and kowtow to me, and you'll be my disciple from now on." The force of Qin Shuwen's palm had increased by a few notches. All the muscles on Wu Qi's body were trembling violently. The force of thunder was crazily surging in his meridians, stimulating all his internal organs and making them vibrate at a very high frequency. The powerful electric currents kept flowing inside his body. Wu Qi's body was twitching and shivering, and the short hair on his head stood up. Suddenly, a few dazzling sparks burst out from the ends of his hair. Haoying Xiong and the others looked at Wu Qi, who was being pressed down by Qin Shuwen's palm. They kept quiet out of fear, not daring to make any sound. A mighty Jin Dan realm human immortal had struck out and killed a new disciple. Even if he was backed by a duke like Lu Chengfeng, who would dare to say a word? He was just a rookie duke who had just inherited the title of nobility. If it were someone like Yu Xian, he might still be able to make people fear him, but the weight of Lu Chengfeng was far from that. A bright gleam shone from Qin Shuwen's eyes. He stared fixedly at Wu Qi, whose body was shivering uncontrollably. With a faint smile on his face, he said, "Aren't you going to kowtow to me? Acknowledging me as your master will bring you a lot of benefits. The Sword of Raging Thunder is the fiercest and sharpest sword technique in Heaven-Breaking Sword sect. I don't care what level of disciple you are, I'll teach you the essence of the Sword of Raging Thunder. Isn't that good?" Wu Qi's body turned stiff, trembling violently under Qin Shuwen's palm. His nerves were nearly separated from his body. Even though he was roaring crazily in his mind to take over his body, he still couldn't move even a finger. He stared at Qin Shuwen with his eyes wide open. His eyeballs were popping out from his eye sockets bit by bit, nearly bursting out from his eye sockets by the powerful force of thunder. "Kneel down, kowtow, perform the ritual of acknowledging me as your master. Are you still not willing to do that?" An unhappy expression emerged on Qin Shuwen's face. He sneered and said, "Are you saying that I'm not qualified to be your master? Do you really think that I'm not qualified to teach you? Don't think that you will have a great achievement in the future just because you have some innate talent. In my eyes, you are no different than an ant. Wu Qi opened his mouth, wanting to let out some curses. However, as the muscles around his vocal cords were paralyzed by the electric current, how could he make any sound? He fixed his gaze on Qin Shuwen and could only let out a weak sound of air flow from his throat. Gradually, blood began to flow out from his 7 apertures. The crimson blood looked particularly dazzling against his fair skin. Haoying Yingxiong and the others were still standing at the side, remaining silent. They dared not to make any noise. They bowed their heads, not even daring to look at Wu Qi's current appearance. Even Haoying Fengying, who had formed an alliance with Wu Qi, could only lower his head and stare quietly at the tip of his own feet. The so-called alliance, the so-called code of brotherhood, under the pressure of a human immortal of Jin Dan realm, they were nothing but bullshit. Qin Shuwen was laughing, a very happy laugh. Wave after wave of thunder force kept bursting out from his palm, smashing into Wu Qi's body. While laughing, he scolded, "You're really not giving me any face. I've personally taken you as my disciple, but you didn't even say a word, and showed no reaction at all. Wu Qi, oh Wu Qi, what can I say about you? Who are you relying on? You actually dare to not put this elder in your eyes?" Qin Shuwen clenched his fingers together, and in an instant, a dozen cracks appeared on Wu Qi's left shoulder blade. The severe pain made Wu Qi's vision blacked out, and the circulation of innate energy in his 12 standard meridians and 8 extraordinary meridians stopped immediately. The few meridians near his left shoulder were clogged up, and the meridians there were like the intestines of a chicken that had been forcefully inflated. Gradually, they began to swell up, making Wu Qi's shoulder swell up. Staring straight into Qin Shuwen's face, Wu Qi swore in his mind that no matter what background Qin Shuwen and Qin Qingshui had, no matter what kind of rich and powerful clan the Qin clan behind them was, he swore that he would wipe out every last member of the Qin clan. Twice, this was the second time that the Qin clan had tried to kill him without any reason. The first time was Qin Qingshui, but it was a pity that he failed. But this time, it was a human immortal of Jin Dan realm who personally struck. The innate water energy was flowing slowly in the water meridians in both his arms, constantly devouring and absorbing the thunder force that blasted into his body. Among the 5 elements, gold gave birth to water. Qin Shuwen's Raging Thunder Sword technique was a variation of the gold element sword technique. The thunder force unleashed by him was filled with the energy of gold element. Bit by bit, the innate water energy was absorbing the thunder force, transforming it into his own cultivation base. With the water meridians as the center, the blood in Wu Qi's body formed into 2 huge whirlpools, transforming and absorbing the thunder force that gushed into his body and storing them into the water meridians. This was a cultivation technique that was completely different from the orthodox cultivation technique. Even though Qin Shuwen had formed the Jin Dan realm and possessed the body of an immortal, he still couldn't sense the subtle transformation happening in Wu Qi's body. Scroll of stealing, no matter it was a great thief or a petty thief, all of them had the ability to conceal their aura. If they were easily discovered by others, how could they steal the profound meaning of the heaven and earth? It was because Wu Qi's body was slowly transforming the thunder force that blasted into his body that Wu Qi was able to hold on until now without being killed by the thunder force. If it were any other cultivator of Xiantian realm, after being struck by such a heavy attack by Qin Shuwen, his internal organs would have long been burned into ashes by the thunder force. You don't want to acknowledge me as your master? You really don't want to? You don't want to learn the profound meaning of the Raging Thunder Sword technique? Like a cat toying with a mouse, Qin Shuwen revealed a mocking smile. He liked to see people struggling in a desperate situation, and he liked to see the look of despair and helplessness on their faces. The fact that Wu Qi was able to hold on for so long under his thunder force had filled him with an abnormal pleasure. The longer he could hold on, the better it would be. He liked to toy someone to death slowly. It looks like you really don't want to give me any face? Who are you relying on? Qin Shuwen burst into a loud laughter. Haoying Fengying, who had been standing aside without saying a word for a long time, suddenly mustered his courage. He raised his head up carefully, lowered his voice and said, "Elder Qin, Wu Qi is the man personally ordered by Princess Zhanglu." Qin Shuwen turned his head back angrily. His eyes focused, and an invisible sword intent knocked Haoying Fengying several hundred feet away. The fierce sword intent sliced open Haoying Fengying's body, bringing up tens of long streams of blood. Qin Shuwen roared furiously, "Who do you think you are? How dare you interrupt me? You are just a dog with no manners." Although Qin Shuwen's words were harsh to the ears, it had also scolded Haoying Xiong. Haoying Xiong's face turned blue with anger. If Haoying Fengying was a dog, then didn't that mean all the members of his Haoying clan were dogs? Although Haoying clan was a clan that had risen in the recent few hundred years, there were still people in their clan who were ranked among the 9 ministers. They were one of the most prestigious clans in Great Yan Dynasty. Haoying Xiong raised his head and glared at Qin Shuwen, then strode towards Haoying Fengying. He took out a healing pill and gave it to Haoying Fengying to stop the bleeding. While working, Haoying Xiong said with a deep voice, "Elder Qin, I'll report what you said just now to the elders in my clan." Qin Shuwen glared at him, sneered and said, "Oh? Then you can lie down with me." Qin Shuwen retracted his right palm, then performed a sword incantation and was about to point his finger at Haoying Xiong. Qin Shuwen had never expected that right after he retracted his right palm, Wu Qi would use the quickest speed, even at the cost of his own blood essence, to forcefully devour all the thunder force in his body using a mystic technique learned in Scroll of Stealing. Without the replenishment from the external thunder force, once the thunder force was absorbed by his body, he immediately regained his ability to move. He glared at Qin Shuwen furiously, then pulled out a thick stack of explosive talismans from his storage ring. These talismans were the defensive items that Wu Qi had bought from Yenbugue with a hefty sum of money during the past few days. Ji City was a dangerous place. Following Wu Wang's instinct of arming himself to the teeth, after Lu Chengfeng inherited the title of duke, Wu Qi had immediately used all the gold, silver and jewelry he found in Little Meng City to purchase a total of 200 explosive talismans. Now, he had taken out all 200 explosive talismans. With the quickest speed possible, he shoved all 200 explosive talismans into Qin Shuwen's belt. After that, Wu Qi circulated all his innate water energy and exercised the escape art of innate water. In just a blink of an eye, he had fled several hundred feet away. After that, Wu Qi performed a hand incantation and shouted out loud, "Explode!" A miserable howl and a loud boom echoed out. Heaven's Will Palace was instantly enveloped by a raging flame. 200 explosive talismans controlled by Wu Qi using his divine sense exploded at the same time. Chapter 88. The flames spread in all directions, and a threatening heat wave blanketed the entire Heaven's Will Palace. Haoying Xiong, Haoying Fengying, and a few other men were pushed far away by the airflow. Their bodies were pressed tightly against the wall of Heaven's Will Palace, unable to move even a little bit. The tremendous pressure made blood burst out from their 7 apertures, and all their internal organs were severely injured. Especially for the 4 old men who were sitting on the cushions just now. God knew how many of their bones were broken by the explosion, and they had fainted while coughing out blood. However, the one who suffered the most was Qin Shuwen. As a middle-stage human immortal of Gold Core realm, Qin Shuwen had never thought that Wu Qi could actually attack him, and that Wu Qi really had the courage to attack him, and that Wu Qi really possessed something that could hurt him. Explosive talismans, especially those used by the secret agents of Scouting Office, were the best of the best. They were crafted by the Heavenly Spirit sect, the sect that was the best in crafting talismans in Great Yan Dynasty. The power of each explosive talisman was roughly equal to the power of a highly explosive grenade. When 200 explosive talismans were stacked together and detonated, the destructive power would be far greater than 200 highly explosive grenades. Qin Shuwen didn't use his energy to protect his body, and he didn't have the time to take out any defensive magical treasure. With his cultivation base, it was impossible for him to own a spirit item that could protect its owner on its own. Therefore, he had suffered the explosive power of 200 explosive talismans at a close distance. His clothes were torn to shreds, and his body was badly mutilated from the explosion, from his chest to his knees. It was a horrible sight to behold, especially the area near his dantian, the vital spot where the Jin Dan realm human immortal Jin Dan resided. Qin Shuwen's abdomen was nearly pierced through by the explosion. A large amount of pale golden airflow kept bursting out from the bowl-sized hole on his abdomen. The destructive power of the explosive talisman had wounded his Jin Dan and caused cracks to appear on his Jin Dan. Jin Dan was the most fundamental thing for a human immortal, and it was the seed that they used to develop their nascent soul. When a human immortal successfully cultivated the Jin Dan, he would have a lifespan of 800 years, but when he cultivated his nascent soul, he would have a lifespan of at least 3,000 years. If Jin Dan was damaged, not only would his cultivation level fall a lot, but it might also affect his future nascent soul cultivation. Qin Shuwen, who was severely wounded by the explosion, sat on the ground with a blank expression. He stared blankly at the huge wound on his lower abdomen, sensing the messy and broken meridians near his dantian. He threw his head back and let out a miserable howl that shook the heaven and earth. His Jin Dan was damaged. Along with the pale golden airflow gushing out from his body, Qin Shuwen could clearly sense that his cultivation base was fading away bit by bit, and the connection between his divine will and Jin Dan was weakening as well. If not for the fact that a human immortal of Jin Dan realm had the body of an immortal, which was at least 10 times stronger than an ordinary mortal, a warrior of Hotian realm, or a Taoist of Xiantian realm, Qin Shuwen would have long exploded into pieces. Although the 200 explosive talismans meticulously crafted by Heavenly Spirit sect were of the lowest grade among all fire element talismans, when Qin Shuwen imagined the scene of 200 explosive talismans exploding at the same time, he could not help but feel a chill running down his spine. The floor of Heaven's Will Palace was crafted using mountain rocks with a high content of iron and was protected by all kinds of defensive formations. A hole of about 10 feet in diameter was created by the explosion. Wisps of dark smoke kept gushing out from the hole, and tiny pieces of dark flesh and sticky blood could be seen everywhere. 99% of these things came from Qin Shuwen's body. Qin Shuwen covered his dantian tightly with both hands, exerting his cultivation to stop the energy of Jin Dan from leaking out. He murmured to himself, "I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you. Wu Qi, you've ruined Qingshui's plan, I'm going to kill you. How dare you hurt me, your patriarch, with the explosion? I'm going to kill you." Qin Shuwen, who was nearly hysterical, suddenly threw his head back and let out a shrill cry into the sky. "Wu Qi, your patriarch, will definitely kill you." Wu Qi, who was sent flying several hundred feet away by the enormous airwaves unleashed by the explosive talisman and nearly had all his bones and joints shattered, stood up from the ground while letting out a strange laugh. He stood up inch by inch and slowly straightened his body. Casually, he took out an innate water pill and shoved it into his mouth, using the medicinal strength to stimulate his innate water energy and nourish his damaged meridians, bones, and flesh. After that, Wu Qi fixed his gaze on Qin Shuwen and strode towards him. "Want to kill me? Old dog, Wu Qi will fight you to the death." The will to fight that came from the depth of Wu Wang's soul was burning like a raging flame. Wu Qi's eyes had turned bloodshot. Once someone showed hostility towards you, you would use the most violent method to destroy him. Completely destroy his will and flesh, his soul, and everything he had. This was the best reward to the enemy. With a hideous smile on his face, Wu Qi came next to Qin Shuwen, whose face had turned pale. He pressed both palms forcefully on both sides of Qin Shuwen's chest, covering the position of his lungs. Qin Shuwen was cultivating the Raging Thunder Sword technique, a variant sword technique of gold element. Among the 5 elements in the human body, gold meridians originated from both lungs and were the source of the great white energy essence. For those who cultivated gold element cultivation technique, the most vital part of their foundation was located in both lungs. Soundlessly, the pure and dense innate water energy invaded into the body of Qin Shuwen, who was nearly in a coma. It was like the spring breeze and rain that nourished everything silently. In just a blink of an eye, It had found out the current condition of Qin Shuwen's body. Jin Dan was severely injured, his body was severely wounded, and his spirit was nearly in a coma from the shock. At this moment, Qin Shuwen was like a city that had lost all its soldiers, completely defenseless. The innate water energy went straight into Qin Shuwen's body, but it did not cause any reaction from him. Quietly, Wu Qi unleashed his divine sense, carefully checking on Haoying Xiong, Haoying Fengying, and a few other men. They had been knocked unconscious by the tremendous destructive force produced by the explosive talisman, and none of them had noticed what was happening here. Wu Qi put his mind at ease. With a hideous smile on his face, he exercised the mystic technique found in Scroll of Stealing. An invisible whirlpool emerged in the center of his palm. Wu Qi exercised the innate water energy and wrapped around Qin Shuwen's lungs bit by bit. Qin Shuwen had the innate foundation of Tao cultivation, and his innate spirit seed was bred in both of his lungs. When a cultivator stepped into the realm of Xiantian, the innate spirit seed would be nourished by the innate energy, like a seed receiving nourishment from the rain. Gradually, it would grow into a spirit sprout, which would eventually develop into the spirit root for Tao cultivation. Along with the improvement of the cultivator's cultivation, the innate spirit root would gradually grow and grow. It would spread out from the place where it was bred and gradually extend into all the internal organs, changing the innate properties of the body, transforming the human body into the unique body constitution of a cultivator. When a cultivator stepped into the realm of Jin Dan, the innate spirit root would have attained a great accomplishment. Qin Shuwen had the cultivation of middle stage of Jin Dan realm, and the spirit root that extended out from both of his lungs had transformed all his internal organs into the element of gold. When Wu Qi peeped into his body with his divine sense, he found that all his internal organs had turned into a hazy, silvery white color. Currently, Qin Shuwen's heart, liver, spleen, and kidneys still carried a tiny bit of the original color of 5 elements. When all 4 of his important organs had turned into a pure silvery white color, looking like a pure piece of silver without any other color, he would have stepped into the late stage of Jin Dan realm. His entire body would have transformed into the body of gold, and he would have the foundation to form his nascent soul. At this moment, when Wu Qi peeped into his body with his divine sense, Wu Qi found that both of Qin Shuwen's lungs had turned into a pure silver color, glinting with a dazzling silver light. The razor-sharp grand white energy was rolling and rocking in both of his lungs. Wisps of sharp energy kept flowing out from both of his lungs, invading the other 4 important organs. The enormous grand white gold energy had condensed into a vague shadow of a tree root in both of Qin Shuwen's lungs. Part of the root went straight through his dantian and connected with the Jin Dan realm, while the other part extended along his meridians, drilling into his heart, liver, spleen, and kidneys. If you were cultivating with some other cultivation technique, I wouldn't be able to deal with you. But it's a cultivation technique of gold element. Gold gives birth to water, and the energy of gold element can be transformed into the energy of Kuei water. Wu Qi grinned hideously. Suddenly, a faint sound of waves was heard coming out from his palm. The innate water energy suddenly burst out with a frightening suction force. The silvery white energy in both of Qin Shuwen's lungs suddenly faded away. The natal gold element energy that he had painstakingly cultivated for several hundred years was being absorbed into Wu Qi's body, quickly transforming into an extremely pure innate water energy and storing it in Wu Qi's water meridians. Not only the natal gold element energy that was leaking out, the innate spirit root in both of Qin Shuwen's lungs that had already taken shape suddenly had countless of its root system crack. The natal innate energy that formed the innate spirit root was also absorbed into Wu Qi's body, quickly merging into Wu Qi's lungs. In just a blink of an eye, Wu Qi felt that the function of both of his lungs had improved by a lot, and even his breathing had become much easier. This was an opportunity to change a person's constitution from the root. Wu Qi crazily stole the spirit root that Qin Shuwen had cultivated with great effort, then slowly condensed the natal innate energy in both of his lungs into a tiny innate spirit root of metal element. This was the scariest thing about Scroll of Stealing. As long as the elemental attribute was the same, There was nothing under the heaven that could not be stolen. Even your innate talent, your innate aptitude, everything about you could be stolen from your own body, turning it into your own innate talent for others to use. Originally, Qin Shi Huan's innate talent in cultivation could be considered as an upper tier, but it was just at the edge of upper tier. But today, after Wu Qi extracted his natal innate energy, his innate talent in cultivation had dropped by 1 grade, from the edge of upper tier to the upper tier of mid-tier. From today onwards, the speed of Qin Shi Huan's cultivation would be greatly slowed down. No matter it was the speed of absorbing natural energies, or the efficiency of transforming natural energies into his own energy, all of them would be at least 30% slower than before. Initially, he still had the hope of breaking through to the nascent soul realm. But now, it was nearly impossible. Exerting all his strength, Wu Qi fused all the natal gold element energy and natal innate energy that he could steal from Qin Shi Huan's body into his own body. After that, he fixed his eyes on Qin Shi Huan's kidneys. Gold gave birth to water. For those who cultivated gold element cultivation technique, when the gold element energy was absorbed by the kidneys, it could be easily transformed into the energy of kidney water. Therefore, the energy essence around Qin Shi Huan's kidneys was very powerful. In other words, in some aspects, his functions were very powerful as well, at least 100 times more powerful than an ordinary man. You're not cultivating with a water element cultivation technique, so why do you need 2 good kidneys? You old pervert, you're already a few hundred years old, yet you still have such a powerful energy source in your kidneys. How many innocent girls do you want to rape every night? Well, today I'll fulfill your wish. After flipping the unconscious Qin Shi Huan over, Wu Qi pressed both palms forcefully onto Qin Shi Huan's waist. He exerted the full power of the hand of web. A faint blue light shone out from Wu Qi's palms. With all his effort, he began to crazily extract the enormous water element energy from Qin Shi Huan's kidneys, fusing it into his own body. A cold feeling flowed into his body through his palms, and quickly fused into his kidneys. The cold feeling quickly transformed into a scorching heat in Wu Qi's kidneys. He could feel his energy getting better and better. His kidneys were like 2 powerful engines, driving a certain part of his lower abdomen to change its shape, turning it as hard as steel and as hot as fire. A cultivator of Jin Dan realm indeed has an abundant source of energy. Wonderful, the energy in the kidneys is exactly the same as the cultivation technique of water chapter. Watch me drain your kidney energy. When stealing the source energy of gold element from Qin Shi Huan's lungs, Wu Qi could only steal a very small part of Qin Shi Huan's source energy, due to the difference in their cultivation and the ratio of gold element to Kuei water. However, the source energy of Qin Shi Huan's kidneys was an innate water element. Therefore, when Wu Qi used the water chapter cultivation technique to extract Qin Shi Huan's kidney energy, it was as easy as blowing off dust. Although it was also limited by his cultivation, Wu Qi still managed to steal at least 30% of Qin Shi Huan's kidney energy. When the clamor came from the outside of Heaven's Will Palace, Wu Qi had already plundered everything he could from Qin Shi Huan's body. Slowly, he coughed out a mouthful of blood and fell to the ground, pretending to be dead. Chapter 89. One after another, footprints were left deep on the floor of Heaven's Will Palace. The footprints were 3 inches deep, and the lines on them were clear and distinct. Even the lines on the toes could be seen clearly. Clad in a white robe, Nye Baihong had his hands clasped behind his back, and his long hair hung loosely behind his back. Through the corner of his eyes, Wu Qi glanced at the footprints left under Nye Baihong's feet, wondering if Nye Baihong was destroying everything wherever he went. Even the sturdy floor of Heaven's Will Palace, which was protected by defensive formations, couldn't withstand his sword energies. If he went to the imperial palace of Great Yan Dynasty, would he also destroy the floor of the imperial palace? Would Yan Dan ask him to pay for the repair fees? With a subtle smile on his face, Nye Baihong came next to Wu Qi. He lowered his head and looked at Wu Qi, who was gasping for breath, coughing out a mouthful of blood, and had a few bloody marks all over his body. gasping for breath was the result of Wu Qi activating the concealing technique found in Scroll of Stealing, concealing his aura. Coughing out a mouthful of blood was the result of his internal organs being injured by the shockwave. The bloody marks on his body were caused by his own sword. Since his internal organs were injured by the shockwave, why would he care about these minor injuries? In short, Wu Qi looked like he was severely injured, like a pitiful little kitten who had been trampled by 10 elephants in turn. With great effort, Wu Qi opened his eyes, squeezed out a strained smile and said, Master, why did Elder Qin want to kill me? With a simple question, not only did Wu Qi bring the relationship between him and Nie Baihong closer, he had also pushed all the responsibility to Qin Shuwen. In front of nearly 100 disciples of Heaven-Breaking Sword sect, Wu Qi had addressed Nie Baihong as his master. How could he not handle this matter impartially? Well, once he handled this matter impartially, saying that it was Qin Shuwen who wanted to kill Wu Qi, and Wu Qi was just defending himself, it was needless to say who was responsible for this matter. The corner of Nie Baihong's mouth curved up, and the subtle smile became more obvious. With a twitch of his finger, Nie Baihong fished out a pale silver pill and threw it towards Wu Qi. Wu Qi opened his mouth and swallowed the pill in one gulp. Immediately, a medicinal strength with a slight cutting power flowed through his entire body, rapidly healing the injuries caused by the thunder strength in Wu Qi's body. Visible electric light spurted out from Wu Qi's pores, and thin blue light danced on his skin, turning him into a man of light. Snorting coldly, Nie Baihong cried out unhappily, "It is indeed the raging gold element thunder force. Elder Qin, the older you get, the more useless you become. How could you attack a new disciple?" A Jin Dan middle stage human immortal attacked a Khanate Taoist master and was injured to this extent. How can the Heaven-Breaking Swordsmanship sect Elders Guild keep their face? Qin Shuwen, who was lying on the ground and badly mutilated, showed no reaction at all. No matter who it was, after his dantian was nearly pierced through, his Jin Dan was severely damaged and cracked, and the prime energies in his lungs and kidneys were plundered. It was impossible for him to remain conscious. Blood was slowly oozing out from Qin Shuwen's body, spreading out and forming a large pool of blood on the ground. Nie Baihong didn't say anything. None of the disciples of Heaven-Breaking Swordsmanship sect who followed him to Heaven's Will Palace dared to save Qin Shuwen. Wu Qi gasped for a few breaths, then stood up from the ground. He bowed at Nie Baihong and said with a serious tone, "Thank you, Master, for giving me the medicine. But why is this raging thunder force so evil? I was nearly killed by him. Not only did he hurt me with his internal energy, he even hacked me so many times with his sword, leaving me with scars all over my body. How am I going to find a wife in the future?" While complaining and complaining, Wu Qi took off his shirt, exposing all the sword wounds on his body for those disciples of Heaven-Breaking Swordsmanship sect to admire. While sighing and asking Nie Baihong why Qin Shuwen wanted to kill him, he took out a bottle of gold wound ointment and carefully applied it on those sword wounds. He applied the ointment to stop the bleeding, and circulated his innate energy to heal the wounds. Although these wounds looked scary, they were not really dangerous. Upon hearing Wu Qi's question, Nie Baihong sighed lightly and cooperated with him. "I'm afraid Elder Qin's cultivation has been growing too fast, and his state of mind couldn't keep up with the growth of his cultivation. That's why he became so arrogant and rebellious. But no matter what, as a dignified elder, he attacked a new disciple, and even wounded himself to this extent. This is just too unreasonable." Wu Qi didn't say anything. Both of them stood side by side, looking at Qin Shuwen, who was lying quietly on the ground. Blood kept oozing out from Qin Shuwen's body, and pale golden Dan energies kept dispersing from his body. The Dan energies were the foundation of the Jin Dan. Every time a Dan energy was lost, his cultivation would drop by one level. At this point in time, Qin Shuwen's cultivation had almost dropped to the initial stage of Jin Dan realm. In another 15 minutes, perhaps his Jin Dan cultivation would be completely gone. If the Jin Dan disappeared completely, Qin Shuwen's several hundred years of painstaking cultivation would be gone as well, and he would immediately become an ordinary mortal. An ordinary mortal only had a lifespan of about 100 years. Once the Jin Dan disappeared, Qin Shuwen's lifespan would be depleted, and he would die with all his cultivation gone. What Wu Qi and Ye Baihong were watching quietly was the journey of a human immortal of middle stage of Jin Dan realm walking step by step towards death. After the time it took to finish a pot of tea, Wu Qi noticed that Qin Shuwen was having difficulty breathing. Only then did Wu Qi pretend to ask, "Master, no matter what, Elder Qin is an elder of our sect. Shouldn't we save him? It is not easy to cultivate to the stage of Jin Dan realm. It would be a pity if he were to die like this." Nye Baihong pondered for a brief moment, then fished out 2 medicine bottles from his sleeve and threw them over to Wu Qi. "Forget it. After all, he is an elder of our sect. Although his way of doing things is a little absurd, he is still an elder. It is his fault that he wanted to kill you. But, as a junior of Heaven-Breaking Sword sect, you can only repay evil with good. You should go and save Elder Qin, so that he will owe you a favor. In the future, he will never attack you again." Nye Baihong smiled happily, but there was an indescribable weirdness in his smile. Wu Qi narrowed his eyes and smiled as well. Qin Shuwen was blown to this state by Wu Qi's explosive talisman, and his foundation of cultivation was stolen by Wu Qi secretly. Now, he even wanted to owe Wu Qi a favor for saving his life. "Qin Shuwen, oh Qin Shuwen, how are you going to fight with your Lord Wu Qi in the future? Do you still have the face to show up in front of your Lord Wu Qi?" "Nye Baihong, oh Nye Baihong, you are a ruthless man. You are humiliating Qin Shuwen to death." With both hands clasped behind his back, Nye Baihong breathed out a faint sigh and said, "The favor of saving my life, tisk." Raising his head up proudly, Nye Baihong stared at the ceiling of Heaven's Will Palace. Gradually, his eyes lost their focus. Obviously, he was having a daydream. Smilingly, Wu Qi carried 2 medicine bottles and came next to Qin Shuwen. First, he used a bottle of 9 Ganoderma Heaven-Replenishing Ointment to treat his external wounds, then he poured a bottle of Tri-Golden Life-Seizing Pill into Qin Shuwen's mouth. He stimulated the medicinal strength and forcibly raised Qin Shuwen's life force, stimulating him to quickly wake up. After all, he was a cultivator of Jin Dan realm. Once he woke up, his body immediately reacted. The light green-colored 9 Ganoderma Heaven-Replenishing Ointment was quickly absorbed into his body. Next to the wound on his dantian, new flesh began to grow rapidly, and the bowl-sized hole began to heal at a speed visible to the naked eyes. A faint white mist sprayed out from the top of his head. The Tri-Golden Life-Seizing Pill was dispelling the clotted blood in his body, mending his meridians, and restoring the energy essence that was consumed due to his injuries. It was easy to restore energy essence, but the innate root of cultivating Tao was something intangible. How could the pills in the world of cultivators be able to replenish the loss of energy essence in this aspect? Qin Shuwen, whose face was glowing with blood and flesh, was now shriveled and skinny like a piece of old tree bark, as if he had lost his original form. However, Wu Qi made things worse. When Qin Shuwen woke up, he smilingly nodded at him and said, "Elder Qin, you're awake? It was me who saved you with the Heaven-Replenishing Ointment and Life-Seizing Pill. It was me who saved you, but please don't think that it was someone else who saved you." Upon hearing Wu Qi's words, Qin Shuwen immediately felt both angry and anxious. His lungs and kidneys, which had lost too much of their innate energy essence, were suffering a severe pain at the same time. With a loud cry, he coughed out a mouthful of blood with a strange color, a mixture of pale silver and black. Obviously, it was the blood essence that flowed out from his lungs and kidneys. With this mouthful of blood, his foundation had been damaged by another 30%. Upon seeing this, Wu Qi did not say another word. He quickly put away the medicine bottle and retreated to the back. He couldn't tease Qin Shuwen anymore, or else, this old fellow would really die of anger. If that happened, no one would be able to repay the debt of saving this old fellow's life. However, even though he did not say anything, Nye Baihong, who was standing beside him, said coolly, "Forget it. As a dignified elder of Heaven-Breaking Sword sect, it is a great humiliation for a newly joined disciple to end up like this. In the name of the sect leader of Heaven-Breaking Sword sect, I hereby expel Qin Shuwen from the Elder Council. Wu Qi, you're able to defeat an elder of Jin Dan realm in a face-to-face battle. Let's not talk about your bone structure and innate talent, but your courage and ability to adapt to the situation are really rare. You shall be my new disciple. With that, Wu Qi had skipped the status of second grade and first grade disciple, and directly became Nie Baihong's new disciple. Wu Qi did not reject the offer. He hastily bowed and thanked Nie Baihong while laughing. Qin Shuwen's unsightly face changed instantly. He stared fixedly at Nie Baihong, gasping for breath like a broken bellows coming out from his throat. Suddenly, he coughed out another 3 mouthfuls of blood essence from his internal organs. After these 3 mouthfuls of blood, Qin Shuwen fell backward, and his aura quickly dispersed. Wu Qi was taken aback. Was this old fellow going to die of anger just like that? Meanwhile, the corner of Nie Baihong's mouth curved upwards, and a subtle smile appeared on his face. All of a sudden, a clump of dark watery light shot into heaven's will palace from the outside. A cold and gloomy voice scolded angrily, "What is the meaning of this, sect leader? Are you really going to force old Qin to his death? As the sect leader, your words and actions are against the rules, and you even provoke the elders with words. This is simply absurd and unreasonable." The watery light landed right next to Qin Shuwen. From within the watery light, a tall and skinny girl clad in black clothes suddenly appeared. The girl was half a head taller than Qin Shuwen. Although her body was dry and flat like a chopping board, devoid of any curves, she had a very beautiful face. However, on this beautiful face that looked like a 16-year-old girl, there was an eerie coldness, giving one the feeling that she was a 1,000-years-old zombie that had just crawled out from a coffin. Nie Baihong glared at the girl, sneered and said, "What is the meaning of this, Elder Shangguan? Don't tell me that I have the intention to frame Elder Qin?" The girl clad in black, Shangguan Yuhong, gazed fixedly at Nie Baihong. Suddenly, she snorted coldly, and a dark beam shot out from her waist like a waterfall, thrusting straight towards Wu Qi's chest. Shangguan Yuhong let out a shrill cry and said, "Today, I'll kill you, a little bastard who has no respect for his superiors." Nie Baihong was instantly enraged. He bellowed furiously, "How dare you? Wu Qi is the inner sect disciple acknowledged by me. Who dares to touch even a single hair of his?" A razor-sharp sword energy shot out from Nie Baihong's body. He opened his mouth and shot out a 30-feet-long white beam, clashing and tangling with the dark beam. Clanging noises of swords kept ringing out. Nie Baihong's body remained motionless, but Shangguan Yuhong's body was trembling violently, and she was forced to take 18 steps back. Basically, every time the black and white sword beams clashed, she would take a step back. 18 steps later, a plaintive cry was heard, as the black sword beam burst out with a large sheet of light rain, its color dimmed, and was pushed back at top speed. Shangguan Yuhong let out a miserable cry, as 2 streams of blood burst out from her nostrils. Chapter 90. Nie Baihong sneered. Suddenly, 3 thumb-sized white mists rushed out from the top of his head, transforming into 3 white sword shadows and wheeling in the sky. Then, they merged back into one and returned to his body. The sword beams shot out from his mouth took 9 rounds around his body, and finally transformed into a cold beam that was as thin as a strand of hair and nearly 1 foot long. Then they were swallowed by Nie Baihong. Shangguan Yuhong's face turned dark. She stared fixedly at Nie Baihong, sneered and said, "The unity of profound swords? Sect leader has indeed mastered the supreme sword technique of heaven-breaking sword sect. What a pity, what a pity. The heaven-breaking sword technique is missing the earth and fire sword techniques, and sect leader has only mastered the 3 unity of profound swords. If you could master the 5 unity of profound swords, perhaps you would be able to form your nascent soul right away?" Nie Baihong smiled proudly, then said in a cold voice, "Even if we don't have the earth and fire sword techniques, the unity of profound swords is still the supreme sword technique of our sect. Elder Shangguan, this time, are you convinced? I repeat, Wu Qi is now an inner sect disciple of our sect. Who dares to touch even a single hair of his? Shangguan Yuhong's eyes flickered as she stared at Wu Qi without saying a word. A few cold beams flashed outside the Heavenswell Palace, as a few old men with different outfits and mannerisms revealed themselves from the sword beams. They first gave the severely wounded Qin Shuwen a look, then turned to look at Shangguan Yuhong, whose chest was stained with blood. After that, they asked Nye Baihong at the same time. Sect leader, why is Elder Qin wounded like this? And who is the one who wounded Elder Shangguan? Nye Baihong just kept grinning coldly. He raised his head up proudly and threw a sidelong glance at these elders. After the time it took to finish a pot of tea, he left these elders hanging on the spot. When all the elders' faces had turned livid, and when they could no longer restrain their anger and were about to fly into a rage, Nye Baihong said in an indifferent tone, "Wu Qi, my disciple, tell these elders about the cause and effect of the incident." With a wronged and fearful expression on his face, Wu Qi took a few careful steps forward, then like a frightened bird, he hastily moved closer to Nye Baihong. He lowered his voice and described what had happened in an aggrieved manner. In Wu Qi's narration, Qin Shuwen had turned into a murderous devil, and for some unknown reason, he tried to kill him. Wu Qi was just a pitiful and innocent disciple who was being persecuted by Qin Shuwen. He was forced into a desperate situation, and that was why he risked his life to counterattack and severely wounded Qin Shuwen. Pitifully looking at Shangguan Yuhong and the other sect elders, Wu Qi said in an aggrieved tone, "I was forced to do this." The few sect elders looked at each other, then gave Qin Shuwen a close look at the terrible wounds on his body. They sensed that Qin Shuwen's cultivation had dropped by 1 realm, and his aura had become much weaker. They couldn't help but frown at the same time. A bald sect elder, who only had a small tuft of white hair on the back of his head, sneered and shouted, "This Wu Qi, which clan does he belong to?" Clearing his throat, Wu Qi bowed at the sect elder and said with a deep voice, "Wu Qi is the chief hanger-on of Duke Yenlu, Duke Chengfeng, Zhugezhen." Silence. The few sect elders fell into a long silence. After a long while, the white-haired sect elder suddenly laughed coldly and said, "Ha ha, interesting, very interesting. The hanger-on of Duke Yenlu actually wounded in sect elder of heaven-breaking sword sect? Lawless, this is simply lawless. Wasn't this Duke Yenlu Yenbuji? How did he become Yen Chengfeng?" Nye Baihong also cleared his throat, then told them about the accidental death of Yenbuji, and how Lu Chengfeng was the first one who arrived at Ji City and inherited all his belongings. With a dry voice, Nye Baihong said, "Recently, all the sect elders are in a secluded cultivation, so we have no idea about the replacement of Duke Yenlu." Suddenly, Shangguan Yuhong interrupted. She pointed her finger at Wu Qi and snapped, "For the sake of this lucky Yen Chengfeng's hanger, sect leader, are you going to allow Elder Qin to be wounded like this? Not only did sect leader not avenge Elder Qin, but you even shielded this Wu Qi. What is your intention, sect leader?" Nye Baihong's face darkened instantly. He stared straight at Shangguan Yuhong and said with a gloomy voice, "If he is just the hanger-on of Duke Yenlu, I wouldn't care about his life or death. But as for Wu Qi, he is the disciple personally sent by Princess Zhonglu, who asked me to take him as my disciple. Princess Zhonglu made it clear that if anything were to happen to Wu Qi, she would deduct the supply of energy stones and magical items that Heaven-Breaking Sword Sect is supposed to receive next year, and the supply of energy stones and magical items in the future will be greatly reduced as well." Nye Baihong snorted angrily, then said furiously, "If Elder Qin really killed Wu Qi, Princess Zhonglu would fly into a rage and really deduct the supply of energy stones and magical items from Heaven-Breaking Sword Sect. Who can bear the responsibility? Which sect elder has the guts to solve this problem? If so, I won't interfere in the matter between Elder Qin and Wu Qi. Who can solve this problem?" Silence. Shangguan Yuhong shut her mouth tightly, and the other few sect elders were busy talking about something else, no longer paying any attention to the wounded Qin Shuwen. Nye Baihong sneered, breathed out a long breath, stared at these sect elders and said with a cold voice, "Putting aside the relationship between Princess Zhonglu, as a human immortal of middle stage of Jin Dan realm, Elder Qin has the body of an immortal. However, he was severely wounded by Wu Qi, a mere Taoist of meridian cultivating tier. It was Elder Qin who launched a sneak attack on Wu Qi first, and was even wounded by Wu Qi in the end. If this were to be spread out, would Elder Qin still be able to face anyone? Qin Shu Wen, who had just regained some of his spirit and was silently circulating his energy to regulate his breath, had his mind thrown into chaos. He glared angrily at Nye Baihong, and sticky blood burst out from his 7 apertures almost at the same time. Trembling, he pointed his finger at Nye Baihong, threw his head back and shouted, "This is infuriating." After that, Qin Shuwen's body turned stiff, and he fell backward. Hastily, the white-haired sect elder grabbed Qin Shuwen and pulled him into his arms. The few sect elders looked at each other. 2 of them shook their heads, transformed into sword beams and flew away. Meanwhile, Shengguan Yuhong, the white-haired sect elder, and the other 3 sect elders were still staying in Heaven's Will Palace. They gave each other a meaningful glance, then communicated with some unknown mystic technique. In the end, it was still Shengguan Yuhong who took 2 steps forward and started to attack Wu Qi. Even so, Wu Qi did not respect the seniors of the sect, and brazenly used an explosive talisman to wound Elder Qin. Even if we can't expel him from the sect because of his relationship with Princess Zhonglu, he still has to be punished. The white-haired sect elder shook his head, then quickly chimed in, "What Elder Shangguan said is absolutely right. If everyone behaves like Wu Qi, easily attacking the sect elders, then the rules of our sect will be too lawless. Among the rules of Heaven-Breaking Sword sect, respecting the seniors of the sect, and no one is allowed to deceive the sect elders. This is the first rule." Nye Baihong's face turned serious again. He snorted coldly and narrowed his eyes. Wu Qi, who looked extremely timid and aggrieved just a moment ago, suddenly breathed out a sigh. He straightened his back, clasped both hands behind his back, and looked at the few sect elders with a cold grin on his face. Wu Qi spat on the ground, then used the sole of his boot to rub the spit on the ground. He sneered and said, "It seems like the few sect elders are really determined to defeat Wu Qi? You don't want to let me go, do you? You want to punish me, do you? Do you want to force me to death?" Stretching out the middle finger of his right hand, Wu Qi pointed at the noses of Shengguan Yuhong and the few sect elders. With a ferocious voice, he said, "Look at you bunch of thieves and prostitutes, what the hell are you? All of you are old fools who have lived for several hundred years, yet you want to argue with me, a junior who has not even reached his 20s. You have lived all your years in vain." Slapping his own chest forcefully and producing loud popping sounds, Wu Qi roared like a gangster, "You want to kill me, don't you? You want to punish me, don't you? Elder Shangguan, come, use your flying sword and stab it into my heart. If your master Wu Qi blinks his eyes, he will be raised by you. Come, stab me, use your flying sword and stab me. If you don't have the guts to stab me, you will be raised by Master Wu Qi's concubine." Wu Qi's words were too unpleasant to hear. Shengguan Yuhong's face turned purple instantly. She let out a furious roar that sounded like she had gone mad, and the black sword beam shot out once again. Wu Qi narrowed his eyes and stared straight at Shengguan Yuhong's sword beam. If her flying sword really came stabbing at him, he would definitely use a mystic technique found in Scroll of Stealing, fleeing at top speed even at the cost of his prime energy essence. After that, he would risk everything and fight with these few sect elders of Heaven-Breaking Sword sect until one of them was dead. However, before Shangguan Yuhong's sword beam could be unleashed, Nye Baihong had already snorted coldly and stood in front of Wu Qi. He sneered and said, "Wu Qi, shut up. Elder Shangguan, you are really a good-for-nothing. Wu Qi is right about one thing, you are men who have lived for several hundred years, but have you been living your life like a dog?" Seeing that Nye Baihong had stepped out to protect Wu Qi, Shangguan Yuhong's face fell once again. She pointed her finger at Wu Qi and roared furiously, "What an arrogant kid. You are. When had Shangguan Yuhong ever seen a man like Wu Qi, who was so rude? She, who stood high and mighty, had never been insulted like this before. It took her a long time to figure out what Wu Qi meant when he scolded her. When she finally figured out what Wu Qi meant with his filthy words, she was so angry that she nearly went crazy. Even though Wu Qi was backed by Princess Zhonglu, she still swore that she would kill Wu Qi at all costs. However, Nie Baihong was standing in front of her, and she was really no match for him. Wu Qi sneered, looking at these Jin Dan sect elders with an extremely arrogant expression. Weren't they just human immortals of Jin Dan realm? Wu Qi was given a little more time. In his eyes, human immortals were just some ants that he could crush with one finger. Even though he was no match for a human immortal now, it would not be easy for Shangguan Yuhong to kill him. Not to mention that he had already grasped the pulse of heaven-breaking swordsmanship sect, and had seen through some serious disputes in it. He was betting that no matter how badly he offended Shangguan Yuhong, Nie Baihong would definitely protect him at all costs. Since he had figured this out, why would he still pretend to be a child bride who had been bullied? Naturally, he would be as arrogant as he could be. The more arrogant he could be, the better it would be. Spitting on the ground again, Wu Qi looked at Shangguan Yuhong contemptuously, sneered and said, "You don't have the guts to kill me, it's true. Elder Shangguan, even if I lend you 3 more dog guts, you still won't have the guts to kill me. You're a woman, you're just a coward. If you have the guts, stab me in the heart with your sword." Once again, Wu Qi patted on his own chest. Shangguan Yuhong's eyes turned bloodshot because of anger. Her body trembled violently, and suddenly she threw her head back and let out a furious roar, then opened her mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood. The white-haired sect elder was so angry that the corners of his eyes twitched. He and the other 3 sect elders took a step forward at the same time, eager to strike. Nie Baihong snorted coldly. Once again, 3 streams of white mist rushed out from the top of his head, transforming into sword shadows and wheeling rapidly around him. Seeing this, Wu Qi was bursting with joy. He could not hold back his laughter, and suddenly threw his head back and let out a loud, ear-piercing laughter that made the entire Heavenswell Palace buzz. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.